transmissão por So, good morning, everybody. My name is Miguel Almeida. So thank you for your interest in this webinar and in the House Refuge project. So I will start by giving you some relevant information for you to follow the webinar better. So the first thing is that you have a button that is this one that I'm highlighting, and is for you for the translation to Portuguese or to English. So you must select there. So now you have the opportunity to make this to activate, and after now I will speak in Portuguese. Tem também, bom dia, eu estava a falar em inglês, estava a apresentar este botão de tradução, em que podem ativar o botão de inglês ou português. Podem também ativar ou desativar o áudio original. Se ativarem, portanto, neste botão que estão aqui a ver, verão que há que vão ouvir duas vozes, portanto, que é a voz original e depois a voz da tradução. Outra informação importante é que há aqui um botão também na barra de baixo. Há um botão que é o do Question and Answers, portanto, perguntas e respostas. E é exatamente neste espaço que devem colocar as questões. E eu pedia a todos os participantes que, quando colocassem alguma questão, colocassem inicialmente o nome para quem esta questão é endereçada. A maior parte das questões colocadas, portanto, serão respondidas textualmente, mas serão deixadas uma ou duas questões para cada um dos apresentadores, para, portanto, depois serem levadas para o debate. Verão também que, pelo menos aqui numa fase inicial, tem aqui outro botão, que é de chat, onde podem colocar questões que não são de perguntas e respostas, como dar bom dia ou outros comentários que queiram fazer, mas que não sejam de perguntas e respostas. É muito importante que não ocupem este espaço do Question and Answers para darem bom dia ou para outras informações ou qualquer comentário que não seja de perguntas e respostas. Também queria dizer-vos que os certificados de participação serão enviados posteriormente. Portanto, é uma questão que costumam colocar muitas vezes, serão enviados posteriormente, portanto podem esperar na próxima semana ou na semana seguinte, portanto vos serão enviados os certificados. A agenda deste webinar já conhecem o programa, portanto iremos começar com esta primeira sessão de boas-vindas, que é a que está neste momento a decorrer. Irei fazer já de seguida uma apresentação rápida do projeto House Refuge. Depois, logo a seguir, também haverá uma sessão, uma lição que é sobre um estudo que foi feito dentro do House Refuge, com o apoio da Associação Portuguesa de Seguradores, e depois seguem-se então uma série de apresentações externas ao projeto, e envolvendo muitos países, portanto, desde mercados seguros em Portugal, em França, as experiências com seguros da Austrália, nos Estados Unidos, Califórnia, depois também perspectivas de diferentes tipos de mercados seguradores, como os supervisores, aqui uma palestra sobre o consórcio de compensação de seguros de Espanha, o mercado reassegurador, soluções de seguro, com um especial foco nos seguros paramétricos, e depois então segue-se a fase final, que é de perguntas e respostas e da mesa redonda. Posto isto, passarei então à parte da apresentação do projeto House Refuge. Vou fazer aqui uma passagem rápida. Este é um projeto que é financiado pela IFCT, é um projeto onde se desenvolvem as melhores práticas e se fornece conhecimento para a construção, para a regulamentação aplicada a construções e à envolvente das construções, tendo como pano de fundo a mitigação do risco dos incêndios florestais. E, portanto, este é um projeto que é constituído por um consórcio constituído pela ADAI, a Universidade de Coimbra, Instituto Jurídico. Estes dois parceiros estão mais envolvidos na organização deste webinar, e depois um terceiro parceiro, que é o ITCOM. Foi um projeto que começou a 15 de janeiro de 2020 e terminará a 14 de janeiro do próximo ano. Este projeto surgiu, tanto como eu disse, numa tentativa de melhorar as práticas construtivas, numa tentativa de melhorar as práticas de gestão dos combustíveis na envolvente. Mais ou menos as pessoas conhecem este esquema, portanto, em que, pelo menos em Portugal e em vários países, nós temos uma obrigatoriedade de gestão de combustíveis numa faixa de 50 metros em torno das construções isoladas, portanto 100 metros em torno das comunidades, mas uma questão que se coloca é, desde logo, se estes 50 metros serão, de facto, a melhor largura, a melhor distância de gestão de combustíveis, porque o suporte científico para isto é um pouco duvidoso. Depois, naturalmente, que se coloca a pergunta se esta regra deve ser única ou não, uma vez que, se uma casa, por exemplo, estiver num desfiladeiro, provavelmente os 50 metros serão insuficientes. Se estivermos abaixo de uma encosta, se calhar serão exagerados. Também não são tidas em linha de conta os materiais do edifício ou a existência de sistemas de autoproteção. E, portanto, é um pouco sobre isto que nós nos debruçamos no projeto House Refuge. E, sendo assim, o projeto House Refuge tem várias tarefas. As mais técnicas são estas, uma delas tanto relacionada com as características e as boas práticas de gestão na envolvente, os sistemas de autoproteção e depois os materiais da própria construção e as suas práticas construtivas, como, por exemplo, o design arquitetónico. Com base no conhecimento desenvolvido nestas ferramentas mais técnicas, iremos desenvolver, portanto, boas práticas e modelos que alimentarão uma outra tarefa, que é a das propostas regulamentares e, inclusivamente, propostas para o setor dos seguros, que, na verdade, é algo que nós estamos aqui também a discutir. Naturalmente que nos interessa que estes resultados sejam usados pelos cidadãos e pelos técnicos destas áreas, e, portanto, temos também uma outra tarefa, que é a de disseminação para uma efetiva implementação das propostas e também para a sensibilização, educação e treino da população e dos profissionais da temática. Temos um advisory board internacional, portanto, da Austrália, dos Estados Unidos, de Espanha, e temos parceiros associados como a APS, ou a Autoridade Nacional de Proteção Civil. Fazendo aqui uma passagem muito breve para enquadrar o tema da proteção do edificado contra os incêndios rurais, e trago aqui este estudo que foi feito na sequência dos incêndios de 2017, em que envolveu 963 casas que foram afetadas no incêndio do Pedrógão Grande, e em que nós verificamos que 61% destas casas foram afetadas por um mecanismo de projeção de partículas incandescentes ou de fagulhas. E, portanto, e depois 21% foram afetadas por um impacto direto do fogo. A mim parece-me que nas discussões públicas muitas vezes aparece só esta componente das chamas não chegarem à construção, mas nós aqui vemos que de facto o principal mecanismo é um mecanismo de projeção de fagulhas e, portanto, devemos ter em atenção também este aspecto. Depois, no mesmo estudo, nós verificamos que em 62% dos casos a primeira componente infraestrutural que ardeu foi o telhado e depois, com 16%, as janelas. Portanto, digamos que estas duas componentes são muito importantes nas nossas construções e na definição de boas práticas construtivas. E quando nós, mais tarde, fizemos um estudo para todo Portugal, em que vimos qual era o padrão de construções, verificamos que em 37% dos casos, aqui para os telhados, 37% dos casos, os telhados não têm sequer uma separação efetiva entre as telhas e o fogo, ou seja, estão altamente expostos aos incêndios rurais. Por outro lado, vimos que quando têm material, cerca de 12% dos telhados não têm qualquer material de isolamento e em 28% dos casos esse material de isolamento é vulnerável aos incêndios. Ou seja, nós temos uma construção com pelo menos um telhado muito vulnerável a ser afetado pelos incêndios florestais. Quando olhamos para as janelas, as conclusões são semelhantes. Portanto, em 30% dos casos, nós temos vidros simples com menos de 3 milímetros, que são aqueles que normalmente mais rapidamente quebram, permitindo a entrada do fogo nas construções, e em 16% dos casos não há sequer qualquer proteção efetiva da janela. Portanto, podem ter cortinas ou coisa assim, mas não têm portadas, não têm persianas, expondo muito as janelas, que por si só já eram frágeis e vulneráveis aos incêndios. Também a nossa população não tem um conhecimento claro, ou muitas vezes até à vontade, mas não tem um conhecimento claro sobre como deve fazer a gestão dos combustíveis na envolvente. Muitas vezes pensa-se que ter uma faixa de gestão isenta de combustíveis ou isenta de vegetação que é o melhor, mas isso não é a realidade. Portanto, vemos aqui nesta pequena simulação que eu mostrei, verificamos que a vegetação pode servir como um obstáculo à radiação ou à convecção, mais tarde poderá ignificar as casas, e também diminui a turbulência que se cria, resultante do incêndio florestal. Portanto, neste espaço diminui a turbulência, fazendo com que, portanto, se houver vegetação neste espaço de gestão de combustíveis, portanto, nós temos menos turbulência e menos potencial para a libertação de partículas, que, como vimos, é um dos principais mecanismos que afeta as casas. E, portanto, a questão que se coloca aqui é qual a vegetação que é mais benéfica ou que deve estar nesta faixa de gestão de combustíveis. E nós fizemos nos ensaios, eu não vou mostrar aqui os resultados, porque não é o objeto desta apresentação, mas fizemos este ensaio para cerca de 30 espécies típicas dos combustíveis, determinando aqui qual deve ser a distância aceitável de separação entre a vegetação e os combustíveis e o potencial para as várias espécies para a libertação de focos secundários. Fizemos também vários estudos para tentar perceber quais as características arquitetónicas que devem ter as construções e os materiais usados. Fizemos ensaios de campo onde testamos esses resultados, portanto, essas conclusões, no sentido de tornar a própria construção mais resistente ao fogo. Fizemos também vários ensaios para vermos qual é a eficiência dos sistemas de autoproteção, neste caso, por exemplo, os sprinklers, qual o melhor design, qual o caudal que estes sistemas de aspersão devem ter, quais as melhores sequências de aspersão. Portanto, fizemos isto para ensaios laboratoriais, fizemos para ensaios de campo e e depois temos algumas implementações já feitas, portanto, para a proteção, neste caso, de uma comunidade. Eu passarei agora aqui rapidamente um vídeo portanto, que é do projeto e que eu penso que poderá ser bastante elucidativo. Eu vou só partilhar aqui o som.
São cada vez mais intensos os incêndios rurais que se têm vindo a registar em Portugal e em vários outros países, causando impactos dramáticos na sociedade que resultam na perda de vidas, na destruição de construções e na afetação severa de comunidades. Atualmente, as casas de habitação, assim como outras construções, são consideradas essencialmente como um bem que as forças de proteção civil se veem obrigadas a proteger durante os incêndios rurais. No entanto, a maioria das casas deveria ser vista como um espaço onde as pessoas se poderiam refugiar em segurança durante um incêndio rural. Tal como noutros países, a legislação portuguesa no âmbito da segurança de edifícios contra incêndios rurais é excessivamente simples, não abordando o problema com as especificidades que este apresenta. Por exemplo, a obrigação de uma faixa de gestão de 50 metros em torno dos edifícios isolados assenta num critério que nem sempre é o mais eficaz, porque não tem em consideração as características da área de implantação e a intensidade que uma eventual frente de chama pode atingir nas várias fachadas do edifício. No projeto House Refuge, acreditamos que as casas podem constituir-se como um local de refúgio seguro durante um incêndio rural. Para que tal aconteça, é fundamental capacitar a sociedade, o poder político e todos os profissionais afetos a esta temática, com o conhecimento científico para uma gestão mais apropriada das construções e da sua envolvente, tendo em vista a redução do risco de incêndio na interface urbano-florestal. Propomos-nos dotar o poder político de suporte científico que permita estabelecer regras adequadas de proteção do edificado e a desenvolver e disseminar junto dos cidadãos e dos profissionais da área as boas práticas de mitigação do risco de danos em edifícios na sequência de incêndios rurais. Para que esse apoio seja o mais adequado possível, o projeto House Refuge engloba um conjunto de tarefas que abordam as questões relacionadas com a construção, o espaço envolvente, a regulamentação jurídica e o envolvimento dos cidadãos. Numa fase inicial, é analisada a tipologia das construções localizadas na interface urbano-florestal, assim como as características da sua área envolvente. É igualmente compilada a principal regulamentação nacional e internacional aplicável neste âmbito. A tarefa 2, relativa à gestão da área envolvente ao edifício, aborda 3 aspectos específicos. O primeiro refere-se à determinação do fluxo de calor libertado pela queima da vegetação típica dos espaços em torno das construções, assim como a energia que incide sobre o edifício, sendo a projeção de partículas incandescentes decorrentes de um incêndio rural o principal mecanismo de ignição das construções. Na tarefa 2, analisam-se as melhores práticas de gestão da envolvente de forma a mitigar a concentração de fagulhas junto dos edifícios. Ainda na tarefa 2, é analisada a utilização de medidas ativas de autoproteção, tais como sistemas de aspersão com água ou a proteção de componentes infraestruturais com telas ignífugas. As práticas construtivas são abordadas na tarefa 3. Nesta tarefa, a vulnerabilidade ao fogo das várias componentes de um edifício, tal como o telhado, as janelas ou as portas, é analisada em detalhe. Serão também definidas boas práticas construtivas de forma a reduzir a probabilidade de afetação de uma construção pelo fogo ou por fagulhas. Os resultados das tarefas 2 e 3 convergem na tarefa 4, onde se define um modelo para a determinação da distância mínima que deve existir entre a vegetação e o edifício. Esta tarefa irá permitir definir um conjunto de boas práticas para a mitigação do risco de incêndio rural nas construções e irá permitir a definição de um algoritmo para a classificação do risco de incêndios rural associado a uma construção. Para incentivar a implementação das nossas propostas, a tarefa 5 dedica-se à sensibilização e formação dos cidadãos e dos profissionais que lidam com estas matérias. Nesta tarefa são apresentadas casas-modelo, onde as melhores práticas sugeridas podem ser encontradas. Por último, na tarefa 6, para além da adaptação dos modelos de cálculo de risco de incêndio para um formato que possa ser vertido em regulamentação jurídica, é feita uma análise ao potencial do envolvimento do setor dos seguros nesta problemática. Para além de vários artigos científicos, vídeos e apresentações de disseminação do projeto, no final serão publicados 2 livros, um de caráter técnico-científico e o outro dirigido ao cidadão comum, onde contarão os principais resultados e as boas práticas resultantes do projeto. Para fazer face à grande variedade de matérias abordadas, foi criado um consórcio interdisciplinar constituído por equipas com reconhecimento nacional e internacional nas suas respectivas áreas. Naturalmente que somos receptivos à entrada de novas ideias, pessoas e instituições, convidando todos os interessados a conhecer e a associar-se ao projeto House Refuge.
Ok. Pronto, viram este pequeno vídeo. Também com este vídeo eu terminei esta apresentação do projeto House Refuge e para não haver mais atrasos, eu passarei já de imediato às minhas colegas Caroline e à Inês. Penso que será a Carolina que irá fazer esta apresentação. Portanto, este estudo que nós fizemos no âmbito do projeto House Refuge, em cooperação com a Associação Portuguesa de Seguradores, e portanto passar-lhes a palavra. Gostaria só apenas de lembrar para que no botão de Question and Answers, quando colocarem alguma questão, para direcionarem a questão para a pessoa que queiram que responda. Muito obrigado. Então, Caroline.
Thank you, Miguel. The presentation will be started by my colleague Ines. Good morning, everybody. In fact, I'll start the presentation, then I'll pass the word to Caroline, and then I'll be back in the end. So I'm going to share my screen. A second. Yes, share. And now we will enter the insurance realm. In order to comply with time, we'll read and to make it more clear also. So, so insurance is often mentioned as a fundamental device in addressing societal risks, namely those enhanced by climate change. Let us remember why it is so while considering the subject of our webinar, the threat that wildfires pose to rural dwellings. Well, insurance functions as a means to provide compensation for losses. And compensation is important not only for its social and economic effect, that is, to keep the economic activities functioning and avoid impoverishment of those affected. It is also important because compensation itself has effects upon prevention. In our specific realm, it can allow for a better reconstruction of property lost, making it more fireproof. On the other hand, insurance is also a means of loss prevention. Insurance can be a strong incentive for the adoption of risk control measures by the property owners. Insurers are experts in the analysis of risks and can condition either the access to insurance or the offer of better conditions, broader or especially cheaper coverage, to owners that conform to risk mitigation behavior. So let me change the slide. With these concerns in mind, we wanted first to do a diagnosis of the current condition of the Portuguese insurance market for the risk of fire concerning dwellings in rural areas. We wanted to know what the actual penetration of insurance coverage in this segment was. And in case it proved to be low, we wanted to know what could help to overcome the protection gap. We guessed that the case for the acceptance of risk would be difficult in this segment. Dwellings in rural areas exposed to wildfires combine the features of being small risks, that is, cases in which the value at risk is low and the owners are not willing to invest in high premium, while being exposed to the possibility of catastrophic events, that is, low frequency, high severity risks that have the capacity to affect a great number of risk units. Furthermore, the great wildfires of 2017, which entailed losses of hundreds of millions of euros to the insurance markets, were a demonstration of how real that potential for catastrophe was. So my colleague Caroline will now present you with our findings, and then I'll be back in the end. Let me just stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Inês. I will share my screen now. Yes, so to achieve these objectives that Inês mentioned, the House Refuge Project team developed a questionnaire with 6 questions that can be divided precisely into 2 pillars. And it's important to note that all this work, we did all this work with the collaboration of APS. And the 2 pillars of this questionnaire is the first one, the present situation regarding current practice of acceptance or rejection of wildfire risks and the wildland the wildland urban interface. And the second one, a perspective analysis, evaluation of the factors that could lead to the acceptance of more risks, as well as the factors that in the abstract are considered more relevant for risk assessment. This questionnaire had been answered by 14 insurance companies. And regarding the current practice of acceptance or rejection of wildfire risks, the results indicated that in the Portuguese insurance market, dwelling exposure to rural fires does not lead to a complete rejection of the risks, but risk assumption is not the rule. As we can see here, we can see here like 2 groups. The first one, where we have some insurance companies that does not accept the risk at first, but can exceptionally accept it by based on analysis on a case by cases. In the second group, we have some potential acceptance of the risks. In this exception follows a standard procedure. Well, it's important to note that 9 insurance companies accept risks in exceptional circumstances and through case-by-case evaluation. So here we try to identify 2 factors. The first one, which criteria allowed the risk to be accepted? And the second one, what is the relevance of certain external factors for the non-acceptance of the risk? Well, about the criteria that allows the risk to be accepted, we saw that most of the companies said that it's so important the dimension of the risk. The insured person has to be capable to demonstrate to have taken adequate mitigation measures. And regarding of the criteria of the relevance of parameters for non-acceptance of risks, we saw that most of the companies said that it's unacceptable risks. The first one, a dwelling surrounded by an area with a potential for extreme risk. And the second one, a dwelling built with highly flammable materials and or construction practice that increases its vulnerability to rural fires. And regarding now the perspective analysis, especially concerning the factors that could lead to the acceptance of more fire risk coverage at the urban forest interfaces, despite of the difference of the answers, it was a multiple choice question. We saw that many companies said that existence of models that allow for best risk assessment and solutions that minimize the exposure of houses to wildfires can lead to the acceptance of more risks coverage at the urban forest interface. And now, regarding to variables considered most relevant for risk assessment, we saw that most of the companies said that it's fundamental variables or factors, house surroundings like forest fuels or topography, and the construction materials of the houses. And now, based on these results, my colleague Inês will present you the overall assessment of our results. And now I will stop my sharing. Okay.
And I will be back very shortly. So now to the overall assessment of the results. So we did identify a protection gap. Most of the insurers active in this segment would prima facie not accept the risk. The experience of 2017 proved to be a cautionary tale for the acceptance of risk. Moreover, there seems to be a lack of trust, as also arisen in the meetings, that the homeowners will comply with risk reduction standards in a sustained way, and that the public authorities will enforce the applicable rules. The costs for assessing and monitoring compliance are furthermore seen as too high for their market segment at stake. At the same time, we identified room for improvement. The insurance market itself showed willingness to take on more risks once some fundamental issues are satisfactorily addressed. First, once there are technical improvements that allow for more accurate and less costly techniques to assess and monitor the risk. This ties in with work done by our engineering team and by other teams worldwide, for instance, the Insurance Institute for Building and Home Safety in the US, to identify how the features of the dwelling itself can impact the level of risk. It also ties in with the concern of IOPA that shall be handled by Marie Scholler, considering the absence of adequate risk models for catastrophic risks coming from wildfires. We should also notice that possible progress with AI may bring other challenges, but may also lower the costs of assessing the risk upon contracting and of monitoring it afterwards. Second, once there are improvements in terms of law, especially building and land use law and its enforcement. This ties in with work done by Dulce Lopes, Miguel Almeida, and Caroline Vitali in their assessment of the adequacy of our administrative law. I shall finish by saying that we should bear in mind that wildfires pose catastrophic risks. A full functioning insurance market for this segment shall require a whole ecosystem of practices. It will require mitigation at the community scale with the involvement of public authorities, as I think Rodrigo Tomás and Dulce Lopes will highlight, and is also a major concern in the Californian approach. It may require public-private insurance partnerships, and Francisco Espejo shall share the Spanish experience in this regard, and it will require innovative ways to place and distribute the risk. As Nuno Rodrigues from the perspective of the insurance brokers and Dario Matos from the perspective of the insurance market shall tell us, we are also looking forward to learn how this has been put to practice in other countries, namely in France and Australia, and what difficulties but also successes were met. I am therefore delighted to pass the word to our speakers.
So,
Ok. Obrigado, Inês. Portanto, passaria já agora a Rodrigo Tomás, da Associação Portuguesa de Seguradores, e que irá falar sobre a perspectiva do mercado de seguradores em Portugal. Por força, Rodrigo.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Ines, for the introduction. So I work for the private sector, but I have been a part of the workforce that has helped the House Refuge project build the survey and assess the perspective of what is and what is not in the insurance market currently. After this very good introduction, I will start by explaining a bit what is risk and what risk sharing is core to the industry, and then talk a bit about the gap, the protection gap that has been mentioned. So insurance is a financial risk transfer solution that will guarantee an indemnity in the occurrence of an insured event. On property insurance side, the event should be sudden, accidental, uncertain, and future. In other words, insurance will always require a risk as defined as the probability of an event that cannot be zero, so the event cannot be impossible, but it cannot be also certain. With the introduction of this statistical context, this principle is what sustains the fact that not all insureds are expected to have a loss at the same time. And this is the basis of mutualism that underlines the insurance activity and that allows insurers to charge a fraction of the insured's property value as the premium for the protection the insurance covers. Now, mutualism is a key aspect of insurance because it's what allows more exposed property to a peril, for instance, fire and wildfire, being supported by less exposed risks in the portfolio or in the book of an insurer's exposure. So through the industry sector, this risk is shared and diluted. On the other hand, we have what we call catastrophic risks, which is where we have several risks being affected at the same time by a single event. Fire is a major concern here, and in our times, the challenge of managing this different type of risk is that changing weather patterns have put in question the predictability of how often and how severe these events have been regarding the past. This has a financial direct cost to the insurance system, either by buying the insurer's insurance, called reinsurance, or setting capital aside from the returns to shareholders. The impact is direct, and to be sustainable, an insurer will need to remain solvent. And this means that widespread losses of an unforeseen severity must be avoided. This is managed through risk assessment and risk management. And here the gap comes into the fact that in the past 10 years, wildfire-related losses have become a major concern. The infamous year of 2017 will remain as a year of outstanding losses in the insurance market, both in terms of lives and property. But on the property side, it was one of the worst years of the segment ever, mainly because of the wildfire protection, of the wildfire losses. So in that year, the president of the insurance regulator in Portugal called out what was to be known as the individual protection gap against catastrophes. And if up to that point, we talked mostly in the sector about flood, rain, and earthquake, wildfire joined afterwards as both signaled by authorities as concerns for citizens and opportunities for the sector. Now, the opportunity here for the sector and the concept of the unforeseeable large losses is what has probably generated this cautious approach that Ines and Caroline have just presented before. The study that the House Refuge Project has done through a survey of insurance companies' perspective on the insurability of these risks has demonstrated what is and what could possibly be. And so to bridge the gap and to come from the insurance side and to reach to the client's side and to come together with the both of them, from the client's perspective, the principle of the study states that protection against catastrophes, namely wildfire insurance, should be both acceptable and affordable. On the accessible means that if it cannot be a risk that is mostly declined or not easily accepted. So we would need to move from the space of a tailored suit that is prepared in the back of the room to something that would be almost over-the-counter protection that could be accessible to anyone who comes and asks it. The concept of affordability is a relative one, but IOPA has a criteria based on residual income definition to state whether or not it considers throughout European context whether the insurance protection would be considered unaffordable or not. From the insurer side, in order to build on the gap, the mitigation of uncertainty that is the concern from the insurer side, obviously, and has been stated in the model, comes from reducing the uncertainty. And so the technical models of fire behavior and loss estimates that we have for that the insurance sector has for large companies, large industrial risks, could benefit greatly from having the same type of studies structured for individual households where the insurer's resources cannot reach. And so this would support a faster decision-making process and a simpler price-setting practice. The other part of coming together on bridging this gap would also come from highlighting the fire behavior of construction materials. And new construction materials are constantly coming up as solutions where the fire behavior is not always the first aspect to be considered by individual clients and even by enterprise companies. So it's important that we share these risk solutions, and this concern, and what would be part of either a cultural perception of risk throughout the community, and at the same time, a risk management approach to the same risks. This is something that insurance has, but it's difficult to pass this information to individual clients who may not be fully aware of how this can protect them. And so the key technical features that the study has produced as pure technical aspects, the importance of self-protection, which is still in its infancy regarding what is home insurance protection, or the fire construction, and the impact on the exposure and the vulnerability of a house to a fire loss and even endangering lives, is something that should be widespread. And the insurance market sees this as a great step in making this a lot more aware. There are challenges, has been said, about the assessment of the risk. For instance, the amount of combustible materials around the homes is a dynamic factor, because vegetation will grow, it can be cropped down, but then it will grow again. And this is a dynamic factor that poses the challenge that for mass insurance risks, small insurance risks, small in capital, small in the resources of the clients that are seeking these solutions, it's not viable to have case-by-case assessments. So the assessment stage here is critical, that the process can be streamlined and fast-tracked. And ultimately, it could be the uncertainty that surrounds the risk assessment phase and the gathering of this information in a stance where the insurance companies, will not have the resources to perform an in-case on-site assessment for each case. That could determine whether or not this study could have the desired impact on the insurer's practices, because the accuracy of what the client states are the characteristics of the home, building combustibility, how reliable is the protection system that they have installed, is something that as Miguel suggested, should be and could be certified. And the certification by government institutions is something that would bring that certainty into the underwriting process of such risks. And maybe the key is aspect. And so, as we're trying to build the bridge over the gap, you build bridges by starting on both sides and coming together at the center. And so there is a broader community aspect here to the work that has been done and the purpose of this meeting and all of the work that's behind it, which is risk solutions need to be shared between all of the participants. There is a strong role to be taken on by government authorities, either local or central, either in providing the tools for the certification process, but also for the supervisory and inspection role of whether these measurements are being enforced or not. There is also the greater role of other individuals, especially the preparedness of communities. And communities will include local administration, but also the firefighting forces, the protection forces, firefighters, first responders, who can also help bridge the gap by creating networks, by enforcing efficiency in the response, and coming together on this, joining all the pieces together. So the risk sharing is a part of this, and the building of the community around this risk sharing and the risk culture is ultimately the gain that the community can have based on this initiative and on this study. Thank you.
Okay. Muito obrigado. Thank you very much. So now I'll give the floor to Pascal Meyer from the Groupama group, and Pascal will talk about the perspective of the French insurance market. Pascal?
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Pascal Meyer. I'm the managing director of Groupama Forêt Assurance, which is a mutual specialized within the Groupama group in forest insurance, damage and civil liability. That means that we do not guarantee any house, any dwelling house. We guarantee only forests. So I will be rather brief, and I will limit my presentation to the subject of brush clearing around houses, which is a hot topic at the moment in France. Well, in 2022, we have had big forest fires in France. More than 60,000 hectares of forest have burnt, which is extremely high for France. The average of the last 10 years was about 10,000 hectares per year. And that was concentrated mainly in the Mediterranean region. But last year, many areas everywhere in France, in the west, the north, and even in the mountainous regions of the east have been affected by fires of more than 1,000 hectares, which is rather exceptional. So the priority of the firefighters were people and properties. And there have been a lot of preventive evacuations. Fortunately, less than 25 houses have burnt and no dead has been reported. All that made the French people aware of the risks when living in a wooded area, but this awareness remains very low in France, and great efforts still have to be made so that real preventive measures are taken by homeowners. In France, in territories classified as at risk of forest fires, that means Mediterranean region and southwest of France, for example, the owners of houses located less than 200 meters from a wooded area are subject to a legal obligation to clear brush. This brush clearing concerns a perimeter of 50 meters around the house. And the neighboring owners, if there are any, cannot refuse this clearance, this clearing on their property. If the house owner doesn't do this clearing, the mayor of the village or of the town may give the owner the order to organize this brush clearing, may give him a formal order, and sanctions exist, but they are largely ignored up to now, and very few people do properly this clearing. In terms of insurance, the insurer can apply an additional exemption of up to 5,000 euros in the event of fire and absence of a brush clearing from the house owner. A law is under consideration by the French Parliament. It proposed to double this exemption up to 10,000 euros and to oblige the insurer at the time of any subscription of or any renewal of the contract with a certificate of compliance in terms of brush clearing. But the French Federation of Insurers, which is called France Assureur, is against this measure, which would make insurers bear the control obligation that should be taken by the governmental authorities, whether they are local or central. So there is a great possibility that this part of the law will not be adopted, and we will stay in the previous form. In conclusion, a very big effort has to be made in France to clear brush around homes and in concerned areas, and it will probably take several more years because we have a problem of assessment, whether it is from the insurance companies or from the governmental authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Pascal. So now I will give the floor to Tom Alves from the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute. Tom will talk about the experience of mandatory insurance as they have in Victoria, Australia. Please, Tom.
Thank you, Miguel. I'm just going to share my screen.
Please. Okay, it's coming.
It's good. Is it coming up as a full slide?
Yes, but it's not in the presentation mode still.
Oh, okay, I shall do that. Okay, good. There we go.
Yeah, but it's in your presentation view, so we can see the next slide. Maybe you can change the screens.
No.
On top, on display settings.
On the top,
Yep.
on the display settings, you will see change screen, something like that. Display settings, if you go there, on the top bar.
Yeah.
To the right, to the left, to the left.
Okay. Oh, there's another.
To the right. Now to the right. It's the next button. Display settings. On the right.
Okay.
I can't.
On the right, if you go up.
Yeah, I
No.
can't. It's
So
underneath.
on the top, yeah, to the left. Go,
Yeah,
because I can see your mouse.
Here we go. Yeah. So I couldn't see it because of the.
But it's on the left.
Yeah.
Okay,
I've got
it's there.
That's it.
Swap, yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
there.
now it's perfect.
Okay. I'm so sorry about that, everybody.
No, you are very welcome. No problem.
Hello, and look, thank you so much for the invitation to join you all the way from Australia. It's evening here, of course, but good morning to you. And I am the head of development at the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute, which is a member actually of the European Network of Housing Researchers. And it's through that connection that I've been invited to participate in this particular webinar. So thank you. Don't ask me why an Australian organisation is part of the European Network of Housing Researchers. I think it's the same sort of situation where Australia finds itself competing in the Eurovision Song Contest as well. But appreciate the chance to speak to you today. What I'm going to do is give a bit of an overview of the Australian the context of wildfires in Australia, which is, I think, quite different to the European context. We actually call them bushfires here, so I'm going to be using that terminology from now onwards. Then I want to, I guess, give a bit of an overview of Huri, the organisation where I am, and the kind of work that we are doing in this particular space at the moment, and how that relates to your home refuge project there. And then I will then after that, I will talk a bit about, I guess, the context of regulation and some of the building design issues that were covered in the first presentation, how those are being looked at and addressed here in Australia. And then I'm going to finish up by a very quick overview of some of the insurance issues that have come up over the last, in response to the last couple of bushfires that have occurred in Australia. I should say I'm not an insurance expert by any means at all. I'm an architect by training, and then have studied housing policy, and I've been a housing researcher for a number of years, and it's in that capacity that I'm speaking to you. So I'm reaching outside my comfort in terms of my home discipline in terms of going into insurance, but I'm happy to give at least a high level overview, and then happy to stay engaged with your project over the longer time as we move forward. Look, just a quick overview of the history of bushfire and bushfire risk and its impact on human settlement within Australia, at least within the last 100 years. And it certainly goes back a lot further than that. But back in 1926 in Victoria, which is actually where I am, I'm coming to you from Melbourne, which is the capital city of Victoria, sits on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Back in 1926, there was a major fire, which was dubbed Black Sunday, was the 14th of February that year, and 60 people were killed as a result of that fire, and that still exists within I guess, the cultural memory within Victoria. And that was followed then by the so-called Black Friday bushfire in 1939, where there were 71 known fatalities. And on this occasion, the number of homes lost was also recorded, and it was 650 homes that were lost in that particular fire. A fire in Tasmania, which is an island state to the south of Australia, in 1967 also had a large number of lives lost, as well as an even larger number of homes lost. But it wasn't really then until 1983 and the subsequent fires in 2009, and of course the most recent fires in 2019-20 that I'm sure you're familiar with, that we've really seen again that level of loss. I've skipped over the 1974-5 bushfire season. 6 people were killed, and there was very little loss of residential property in that particular fire. But it's worth noting because it was and in fact remains the largest single wildfire incident in the world in recorded history. About 15% of the Australian landmass was burnt during that fire, including 117 million hectares of land. But most of that was rural and bushland. And while there was indeed loss of property, it was things like fences and other pieces of infrastructure that were most greatly affected there. But skipping ahead, so Ash Wednesday, 1,900 homes lost there, more than 2,000 lost in the Black Saturday fires in Victoria in 2009. And I was working in the Victorian government at that time, so I'll talk a little bit more about some of the issues that we addressed then. And then, of course, the most recent Black Summer, where much of Eastern Australia along the coast was ablaze, and there were only 26 fatalities, but I think for the first time really a record was kept of people who died from directly from smoke inhalation, and that's an additional 450 people who were affected by inhaling smoke. And again, a large area of land, about 18 million hectares, and nearly 4,000 homes burnt as a result of those fires. So it's obviously a major issue in the Australian context. The reason for that, of course, is the eucalyptus tree, which I know you're familiar with in parts of Europe, particularly in the Iberian Peninsula, but where they've been introduced from Australia. But this whole range of species of eucalyptus trees are in fact native to Australia, and hence pose significant and create a significant fire risk, and really contribute to the extreme severity of fire when it does occur. Fire fronts are typically rage at about 1,100 degrees Celsius, and also have significant impacts on very localized weather conditions, creating effectively firestorms that take on a life of their own. I do want to say just briefly, of course, that Australia has been populated for many tens of thousands of years, and the Aboriginal land management practices did make extensive use of fire as a land management tool, and this has been quite extensively documented in more recent times. And indeed, those practices are used as fire management, land management practice rather, in order to prevent severe fires, and some of those, I guess, traditional practices and traditional knowledge is being rediscovered in some places and used through official land management practice as well. AHURI, the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute, where I work, is the national body that I guess oversees a research agenda around housing and urban research across Australia, where we have partnership agreements with all of Australia's states and territories, and with the federal government of Australia. And then we have a number of university research partners that you can see at the bottom there as well. And we oversee an annual research program which addresses issues of critical interest and concern to all of those governments. And we manage a process of peer-reviewed research which is directly relevant to policy. And it's only, unfortunately, been in recent years that we've started to see the, I guess, the policy question of fire and its risk to homes, and how particularly policy environments can and should be altered to potentially address that risk, and what in fact we can learn from other jurisdictions in that as well, including those in Europe. And so we currently have, and I can't report on the findings because this is in progress at the moment, but we have an inquiry into housing policy and disasters, which has a very, I guess, considerable focus on bushfire as a major disaster type. And so that research is occurring at the moment, and it should be published next year. But that will be an important body of work and speak to, I guess, the range of regulatory and governance controls, including, I guess, the role of the insurance industry within that. As part of that. And then we've also recently funded, and will be publishing soon, a piece of research which is, I guess, coming at it from the angle of climate change adaptation strategies, and looking at international experience and applying that in the Australian context. And again, bushfires is one of the major categories for that. All right, in 2009, I was working in the Victorian government, and one of part of my role at that time, which was just after the Black Saturday bushfires, which were at that time the worst to have occurred in Victoria in history, and I was involved in a program called the Bushfire Home Service, which was part of the reconstruction and recovery phase following the bushfires, and as a measure to deal with the fact that there were more than 2,000 homes lost, and also a way of, I guess, channeling some of the energy and enthusiasm of built environment professionals, including architects, who were keen to, as I guess, an act of solidarity with people who suffered during the process, to offer their volunteer support. And so what this involved was a range of home designs were created. It was modelled on an earlier small home service, which was a way of getting a good design and architecturally designed homes to be available to a much broader group of people. And that was actually reviewed later, I think in 2011, it might have been, not 2010, in MARC, which is a European housing journal that you may wish to get a review of that program from. And the small home service on which it was modelled was a service in the 1940s and 50s that effectively developed a range of architectural plans that were then replicated a sufficient number of times to I guess, lower the design fee and make them accessible and available, because they were pre-approved as a more affordable way of accessing housing at that particular time. And so the Bushfire Home Service sought to do that. And what it did, though, was to embed, I guess, fundamental bushfire design principles. Now, there's been a range of work done, particularly by the CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific Industrial Research Organisation in Australia, and various other professional bodies, including Standards Australia, which is the SAA there, looking at bushfire building design and construction. And so I've got a couple of sources at the bottom of the slides there you can look at, but effectively the principal objective of bushfire resistant building design is to ideally save lives where possible, and also property in the event of a bushfire attack. I will put in a quick comment there that, of course, it is now widely understood around Australia, and particularly in Victoria, that using a home as a refuge is generally not a good idea because of the extreme severity of the fires. And even if the house ultimately resists the fire and the fire moves on, just the level of heat and the lack of oxygen that occur as a result of the fire often do occasion death, regardless of whether the building is destroyed or not, because of the particular severity of those fires. But the basic approach to reducing the likelihood of ignition is the three main measures that have been identified are the three main causes are embers and burning debris carried in on the wind ahead of the fire front, heat radiation from the fire front, and then direct flame contact. And a range of design principles have been developed and tested over time, which are quite closely aligned with the ones we saw in the first presentation today. And effectively, that's about preventing embers and debris from entering or landing on and setting alight to the building. Typically, that means a lot of, protection of openings with non-combustible mesh and things like that. Reducing the combustibility of the building fabric is the second principle, and the third one is obviously removing and discouraging the buildup of combustible material near the building. And of course, well, not of course, but another factor is that wind resistance is an important dimension to building in bushfire-prone areas, because the fire itself, as I said, can generate its own weather system and produce extremely high winds. So effectively, it's like a cyclone attack at the same time as the fire attack. So high wind resistance is also a critical part of bushfire design. Following the 2009 bushfire in Victoria, one thing that did was to occasion a fairly significant review of the Australian standard, a review that had been underway before then, but was elevated somewhat in its importance and brought into play fairly quickly after the fire. And what that did was effectively using the Australian standard for radiant heat exposure and levels of exposure, developed a range of measures that effectively then created a range of bushfire attack levels, which were then applied to particular landscapes, particular areas where houses may or may not be. And so what that effectively does is provide through both the planning system and the building regulatory system in Victoria, it provides a level of risk and I guess the extremity of the risk as a measure, which then obviously impacts on the type of construction and on the cost of insuring a home in those locations. And I just want to end by raising a couple of questions around insurance. Look, after each of the last few bushfires in Australia, there's been a substantial Royal Commission. If you don't know what that is, it's effectively a parliamentary hearing where evidence is taken and various recommendations usually result from a report. And then also there was a Royal Commission after the most recent bushfires in Australia, and that then also formed the basis for hearings held by the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance and Public Administration in the Australian Parliament. It's a Senate committee, and they particularly looked at the question of insurance and addressed a range of issues based on submissions from a range of participants in the market. And these are some of the key things that emerged from that parliamentary inquiry. One was the need for clarity around what is and isn't included within these insurance claims insurance policies. For example, underground infrastructure like water pipes and things like that, fences are often a major source of conflict over insurance following these fire events. And so that was one of the key issues that was drawn out for further work. The accessibility and affordability of insurance policies. We already heard, I think Rodrigo spoke about affordability before. It's a very important issue. And of course, with each of these events, what we've seen is the cost of insurance policies increasing very substantially, sometimes by 300 to 400% in some locations, and obviously being cost prohibitive for a very large number of households, effectively leaving a number of properties unreconstructed. And then another issue was raised and considered is the issue of government reinsurance and guarantees as a way of, I guess, stabilising the market, particularly in extremely prone locations. And there is a precedent for this in the northern part of Australia, where cyclone activity and flooding is a regular event. And there's a government reinsurance program there with a $10 billion Australian dollar guarantee associated with that, with the specific aim of, I guess, ultimately influencing the affordability of insurance policies and making it more viable for insurers to operate in those locations. Clear finding was that what was emerging as a market failure in the insurance market needs to be addressed fundamentally by mitigation of the actual, the climate change mitigation activities that need to take place, because that, of course, is what is causing a lot of these fires. And then the final point I just want to raise is there recently developed a disaster resilience star rating system in Australia, which was also recommended by this committee for further investigation in terms of risk assessment. What this does is effectively provides a more nuanced way of rating individual properties and individual insurance policy requirements around the particular features of a home or a property. And it's a way of seeking to, I guess, reward good behaviour, if you like, in terms of managing risk on the property, for example, by preventing the build-up of a combustible material near the home, by implementing the highest standards through the building system, and effectively seeking to reward those who do that with the ability to demonstrate that they've taken those measures and are potentially less of an insurance risk. But thank you. I think I've gone over time. Apologies for that. I'll hand back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Tom. So thank you also for your availability, because there in Australia it's dinner time, so thank you again. And now we will go to the other part of the planet. So if there in Australia it's 9 hours, I believe 9 hours more than in Portugal, now we go to the United States, that is 5 hours less. And so because of that, so it's 5:30 a.m. And so that's why we will have not a regular presentation with someone presenting, but Sheena O'Shaughnessy, no, it's not easy to pronounce this name, and Mark Northcross recorded a video of his presentation, so allowing them to sleep at 5 a.m. And so now we will see, I think, 12 minutes video that my colleague Luís Mário is, so it's now passing. So when you want, Luís Mário, please.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting us to be here with you today. We're honored to share some of our lessons learned in disaster recovery, particularly in wildfire recovery, and the impacts that we're seeing because of the response of insurance companies and the changes that they have implemented. I'm Sheena O'Shaughnessy. I am the president and CEO of Community Housing Improvement Program, and I'm joined today by Mark Northcross with NHA Advisors. Community Housing Improvement Program is a nonprofit affordable housing developer. We build both multifamily rental properties and we build single family home ownership. in the 2018 Camp Fire, we lost one of our multifamily properties, Paradise Community Village. For those of you who may not remember or be less familiar, the Camp Fire basically happened in the town of Paradise and the surrounding areas, and we lost 19,000 structures and 14,000 homes of those 19,000 structures. Next slide, please. So right after the fire, we immediately started rebuilding Paradise Community Village. We finished in 2021, and within 2 weeks, we had over 250 applications for 35 available units. The biggest problem was we couldn't find insurance. And we had to have insurance because it is a requirement of all lenders in the state of California and also our project partners. So we talked to everyone. And what we learned is that some carriers weren't underwriting in Paradise. Some were underwriting in Paradise, but not at that particular location. Some wouldn't cover affordable housing projects. And while some would underwrite the project at a lower level, they couldn't get reinsurance. Mark is going to talk a little bit more about what reinsurance is and its important role in the insurance problems we're seeing. But what it essentially meant for us is that we couldn't get insurance up to our replacement cost. So we ended up in the London market paying nearly $200,000. For context, that is about 2/3 of our gross operating receipts. And prior to the fire, the insurance we were paying was about $15,000 a year. Last year, fortunately, we were lucky and we managed to get affordable insurance through State Farm, and it was pure luck. They were briefly underwriting in Paradise, and at the same time, they were underwriting affordable housing projects. And now, if you're following the news of insurance in California, State Farm has announced that they are no longer writing new policies, property policies in California. And we're doing all this work in advocacy because we believe that the ability to get insurance shouldn't be based on luck. Next slide, please. We have felt the impacts of the insurance crisis across our entire portfolio. Since 2018, we've seen a nearly 300,000% increase in our premiums. And we have colleagues across California who are seeing similar rate hikes and or are losing coverage completely or can't get coverage for new projects, such as construction, course of construction policies. Where more and more people are looking to the California Fair Plan, which is a state-run insurance program, and it really is meant to be the insurance of last resort. It's not a quality policy, but many individuals in Paradise have had to use it, and it is not affordable, and you have to get two policies because the Fair Plan only covers wildfire and a few other hazards. And so you have to get a second policy to cover the rest, a difference in coverage policy. And this makes the cost of insurance absolutely unaffordable, which is making our entire community unaffordable. But there is hope, and it is impossible to improve community-wide resilience and reduce insurance losses. And that is what Mark Northcross is going to be sharing with you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. Mark Northcross, NHA Advisors. What our firm is a unique type of firm in the United States that specializes in delivering financial advice on how to fund things for public entities, cities, counties, regional governments, state governments. So that's what we do. Paradise is a client, and we quickly learned that what Paradise really needed to recover, to rebuild, was reliable and affordable insurance. So next slide, please. We put together a team of some highly respected organizations in the insurance world to actually develop projections of what the savings in insurance costs, losses, and reductions in insurance premiums would be from implementation of various wildfire risk mitigation measures proposed for Paradise and frankly for California as well. There is a bit of a disconnect between delivery of wildfire home safety and insurance premiums, reliable insurance at an affordable cost. Our goal with this team was to bridge that gap. And you can look at the three of the names there. They really are about that. Number one, a name that you probably know, Munich Re. Depending on the year, the largest reinsurer in the world. Reinsurance is critical to delivering reliable and affordable coverage in wildfire risk areas. Milliman, depending on the year, is a candidate for the largest actuary in the world. They have a lot of credibility with the insurance industry. Finally, CoreLogic. They're what is called in English a catastrophe modeler. That is a very, very important mathematical function necessary for quantifying what actual losses from wildfire risk mitigation measures will be. The other names are other members of our team, more unique to California or the US. Next slide, please. So, what did the report assume and what were the conclusions? Three basic wildfire risk mitigation menus, if you will. Number one is what we call IBHS standards. Another word for it is home hardening. IBHS stands for the Insurance Institute for Building and Home Safety, a national organization highly respected that does the science and how best to protect homes from all kinds of fire risk, including wildfire. They have new standards for protecting homes for wildfire risk. And we assume full compliance by all new construction in Paradise with those standards. We also assume that all new development, as far as its zoning, the street grid, the planning aspects, would meet wildfire risk mitigation standards now being developed. It's called defensible space in English. Finally, we assume full implementation of wildfire buffer zones. These are essentially park or greenbelt areas on the, I'll call it the burnable periphery of a community. And what that means is that they are not fully let go just to be natural. What we call ladder fuels, primarily brush and grasses, are cut back on a regular basis to reduce significantly the chance of wildfires spreading through that area. It's maintain green belts. All three of those, we assume full implementation. May not be realistic, but that's where we wanted to start. What were the results? Well, they were shockingly good. A 75% reduction in average annual losses from wildfire for insurers. Just so you know, average annual losses is a term used in the US and Britain for losses for insurers. It's a statistic that's very important to them. Having that number go down by 75% is really good news, because insurers insure other risks besides wildfire. It only results in a 55% reduction in insurance premiums, which again was shockingly good news. We weren't expecting this. But, and a big but, where again reinsurance comes in, you need a geographically diverse pool of communities. WUI stands for Wildland Urban Interface, the term we're using in the US now. You need to have in that pool the communities that are really being proactive in wildfire risk mitigation, and they need to be spread over a wide area. Otherwise, you won't get the Munich Re's of the world to come in and write reinsurance for the primary carriers. Next slide, please. A little more into the weeds, as we say, a little more detail. How do you prioritize in terms of insurance benefit the three broad categories? At the top are the IBHS standards for new construction. You want to harden the homes. You want to rebuild them, whatever you need to do to make them absolutely maximum wildfire resistant. Number two, the buffer zones come in second place. You want actively maintained buffer zones on the edge of your town. Finally, last place, not that critical, new development, zoning, planning to be laid out in wildfire resistant areas. For the record, this does not add up to, adds up to over 100% because there's overlapping benefit between the three categories. That's a mathematical thing I'm not going to try to explain. Next slide, please. All right, let's go back to the bottom line. No matter how good Paradise is, for frankly, all three of those broad categories of mitigation measures are now being implemented. It's not good enough. You've got to have geographic diversity to bring a Munich Re in to deliver the kind of coverage we need. So how do we get that? We need to find other communities spread throughout California, the Western United States, North America for that matter, to be in a pool. All those communities need to be proactive. Then we can bring Munich Re in or someone like that. That is the basic message here. That's the next step for us in Paradise. Next slide. So what are our next steps? Well, one, we're going to stay the course. All new buildings coming out of the ground in Paradise are going to be IBHS compliant. They're going to be seriously wildfire hardened. We need to find ways, second bullet, to assist the owners of the homes that survived, the non-compliant homes, to get to IBHS compliant. It means a retrofit. It means a remodel. It's expensive. We need to find a way to fund them, incentivize them one way or another. Yes, we are implementing the wildfire-informed development patterns. The bigger challenge is implementing the wildfire buffer zones. That means de facto acquiring fee title, ownership, or an easement, a legal easement, to do the maintenance for a lot of territory on the edge of Paradise. Finally, we got to set up the statewide pool. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you. Sorry we couldn't be there in real time, but it's a pleasure having this virtual communication.
Okay, so even if Shane and Mark are not here, I think anyway. So now it's time for a break. So we will return at 11 o'clock in Portugal, so in about 13 minutes. And so the next presentation will be from AOPA, but then I will present it at 11. So see you in 13 minutes. Thank you. Okay, so let us restart. And now the next presenter will be Marie from EIOPA, that is the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority from from Europe. And so Marie Scholler will talk about the insurance as a tool for the prevention of damage caused to homes by wildfires, and so the perspective of the supervisors. Please, Marie. You are.
Yes, I'm just going to share my screen. Perfect. Can you see the right view?
Perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot,
Please,
and also
thanks
a lot for the invitation to speak today. So indeed, in my couple of slides that I have prepared for you today, I will talk about the insurance sector and its role to also help with adapting to climate change and also to mitigate natural catastrophes. And in particular, I know you have a focus on wildfire today, and this from a view from a European supervisor. So you will see, I will also have talk about the European situation. So first, I think in this group, it's relatively clear. We also had previous speakers already talking about that. Climate change equals insurance risk. I mean, insurers, they are insuring our houses against natural catastrophe risks. And with climate change, also with increasing frequency, intensity of extreme weather conditions, of course, this has also an impact on the insurance risk. And this is why this topic is of extreme importance of EIOPA. And for the people who are not so familiar with what we are doing, I will say a few words about Solvency II. So Solvency II, this is the regime that codifies and harmonizes the European insurance regulation. So within Solvency II, the European insurance companies, they actually must hold enough capital to stay solvent. So each company will have a different risk profile, and under Solvency II, it is required to calculate the capital requirement needed to actually stay solvent. And this is a key aspect of Solvency II, and you will see why I'm going to talk about it today, is because we have also under Solvency II a module, so it's also for natural catastrophe risks, where we are asking insurance companies to actually calculate their risk and to ensure that there is enough capital to cover this risk. So under Solvency II, I mean, the capital requirement is obviously risk-based. So also from a natural catastrophe risk perspective, it will be a combination of hazard, vulnerability, exposure. The time horizon over which solvency looks at capital requirement availability is 1 year. Oh, that's a fact. And then companies usually, they have two ways of calculating this capital requirement. So either they use what we call a standard formula. This is usually used by smaller firms, mid-sized firms, and their EIOPA would actually calibrate the parameters for the standard formula, so for the firms to calculate their capital requirement for natural catastrophe risks. Or larger firms, they might go for what we call an internal model, and usually also linking with the fact that these firms might need to license models, catastrophe models, which can be quite expensive. So far in the capital requirement, climate change hasn't been explicitly included. Now, recently, as you know, also with the European agenda, the topic of sustainability and climate change have become quite prominent, and we have been asked to look again at how natural catastrophe capital requirement is calculated, and to work further in this topic of also including climate change in the standard formula. So for that, what we have been working on is also the fact that you have seen we have this 1 year time horizon. And of course, if you think of climate change, okay, maybe, okay, 1 year is still quite a short time period. But what we have to be very careful here is that actually the insurance companies who are going to use these parameters to calculate the capital requirement, they will use the same factors over a number of years, because these parameters are not recalibrated annually. So that's why, even though we have this short time horizon, it is very important to still have a bit of a more forward-looking and a bit longer-term view, because of also the very dynamic nature now that we see. I mean, there is a lot of new science, new evidences every year, and this needs to be captured by the capital requirements. So I'm going closer to wildfire in a second, but still first mentioning that currently the standard formula covers 5 perils. I have here 4 pictures. We also have subsidence in there, but mainly 3: earthquake, flood, windstorm, and hail. And to do the calibration, we use commercial catastrophe models. And for these type of perils, I think over the last couple of years, the number of models have increased quite significantly. And also because, of course, there is, for many of these perils, a high insurance penetration. So it's also of the interest of the insurance sector to understand very well these risks, and also to be able to model it. So for these perils, what we have already published in a previous paper, a methodological paper, to actually explicitly include climate change in the calibration of these perils to calculate the capital requirement. We actually mentioned that there is a need to review regularly these parameters to make sure that we actually can capture the evolving risk, which for some perils we really expect now to be quite dynamic. So this is one aspect. Now, coming to wildfire. Also in this work around including climate change in the capital requirement, and we have also heard that there are recently also events in Europe that, of course, on wildfire, that of course would need to that we would need to pay more attention to. And that's why in this methodological paper that we have published, we actually also decided to have some perils where we would perform monitoring. Why perform monitoring? Because, well, we see an evolving trend. We see changes in the losses, and we would like to monitor, because we don't know yet if this is material enough to enter in the capital requirement. But we also acknowledge that we don't have enough data and model as of today for us to really be able to take a decision. So there are these perils now, and this is really new, and we have now just started the project of this first reassessment, where we are going to look at what are the data, what are the models available on wildfires, also on drought, for example, also linking with crop insurance. This is new for us, and we really recognize the need for more information and for more data for this type of perils. Something we also need to better understand is exactly what is the materiality for the insurance sector. Of course, I mean, in order to be reflected in the capital requirement, this risk needs to be sufficiently material. So this is really for us some new activities, and I think also that's why it's very nice to be in this webinar today, to also see what's happening in Europe and also worldwide, and maybe we can use synergies, because we are also of the need of that type of information. So with this couple of slides, I close my first part of my intervention today, which was about looking at the prudential aspect of the risk. So really ensuring that the insurance sector has enough capital to remain solvent. Now, the second aspect I would like to touch upon today is the protection gap. I think this is a very important topic, and also we are working closely with the European Commission on this topic, because in Europe there is an insurance protection gap, and this is something that we have been working since a couple of years. I mean, we started with the first step is really understanding what is the current insurance protection gap in Europe. So that's why at EOPA we have, as a first step, developed a dashboard to actually better understand what is the insurance protection gap. So it's also on EOPA's website. We have decided to have a dashboard which actually looks at different perils independently, because many times we hear about the protection gap, you know, with on natural catastrophes, so bundling multiple perils together. But at the end, what we also realized is that windstorm in Europe is typically a peril that might be relatively well insured, but there are other perils like flood or earthquake that would have a less good coverage than windstorm. So we found important to actually look also at the trend for each peril, and we have a European perspective. So we have developed this dashboard here, and the idea was to basically look at the risk, what is the risk of each peril for each country. And to do that, we worked with commercial catastrophe model vendors, and we compare it with the insurance penetration. So we also worked with national insurance supervisors to get estimations on the insurance penetration. And why did we decouple it into these two views is because also a clear message what we have is, if the risk is low, it's actually fine to not have a high insurance penetration, because the idea is not to insure everything, it's also to insure what is relevant. So basically, if the risk is low, you would be in this green zone that shows that there is not a high insurance protection gap. So that was the first step to understand what are we talking about? What is the current insurance protection gap in Europe? Now, of course, the next point is how can we also, we understand what is the protection gap and what can we do? And I mean, we have heard it already also in the previous presentations. I think from EOPA's perspective, we are now talking about what we call impact underwriting. So really recognizing that the reinsurers, or insurers and the reinsurers, they can really play a proactive role to reduce climate change risk. And I think this is very important aspect that we really are supporting. I mean, we have recently published a report looking into non-life underwriting practices and how climate-related adaptation measures are reflected in these underwriting practices. And of course, that's very interesting. I mean, from the insurance sector, we usually see that, for example, for big industrial sites, there are already a lot of very good practices also of risk engineering, visiting the site and providing advices on how to mitigate the risk, and then also maybe be able to reflect that in the risk-based premium, because if the risk is decreased via mitigation measures, then it should also be reflected in the insurance premium. But of course, what would be really, really good is also to see all these good practices to be reflected, for example, in residential insurance. So this is something we are actively working on it, and also within this project, also thinking of raising awareness of citizens to catastrophe risks, and also raising awareness of the prevention measures that can be taken, because of course if you take prevention measures, you're reducing the risk, and then you also ensure that the risk stays insurable, and you will get also a insurance coverage at a better price. So these are all actions that we are working on, and I think it would make a lot of sense also to liaise with some speakers today to also bring this all this work on the prevention measures and how we can leverage that and share it with more people in Europe. So I will finalize my presentation today with a last piece of work that we have been doing at EIOPA, so also on the climate, on reducing the climate insurance protection gap. So this is a work we have done together with the ECB, and it's really about looking into this ladder approach to catastrophe insurance. So really starting, of course, with the primary insurers. I mean, really the role that they have to, of course, cover the risk, but also this proactive risk management, helping us policyholders to better adapt to the risk in order to make sure that this stays insurable and affordable. The same for the reinsurance sector. Also there, to really also from a reinsurance perspective, also see how all together we can work to mitigate the risk. And then ultimately there are also the need to look into more public-private partnerships. I mentioned a bit the lack of models, lack of sometimes data. Many people might have the same issues. Maybe some people might have some data that are useful for others. So that's really about sharing also relevant information to, at the end, for the benefit of everyone, if we can maintain a sustainable insurance coverage. And at the end, what the paper also looks into is the possibility to also think into an EU component for some risk that might be really extreme. So really to have this ladder approach where everybody would have some skin in the game to make sure that we can have a sustainable insurance sector. So with that, I thank you very much for letting me present today.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you very much. A very interesting presentation, as those before. So I just would like to remember that we have a question and answer space area, so where you can all put the questions that will be answered by the speakers. But please start by the name of who the question is addressed, please. I would like also to say that this webinar is being recorded on the YouTube, and so it will be available later at the YouTube. This is some questions that have been appearing. If it will be recorded, yeah, the answer is yes at the YouTube. So let us pass to the next presentation. That comes from Francisco Espejo, a consortium from the consortium de compensación de seguros from Spain. And Francisco will talk about a guarantee fund for catastrophic risks related to fires at the Walloon-Duran interface, the experience of Spain and of the Spanish consortium of the compensação de seguros. Francisco?
Bom dia, muito obrigado. Good morning, everyone, and I'm going to share my presentation and thank you very much for this opportunity. I guess you can see my screen now. Is it right?
Not yet. We only can see los participantes ahora pueden ver su pantalla.
I was in my view. I'm seeing my full screen, but probably I should start again. Don't worry. Sorry about that. And it's okay now.
Yeah. Now we can see, not in the presentation mode, but we can see the.
Okay, it should be in the presentation mode now. Is it?
No.
Oh my God. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm seeing it in presentation mode, so I think I will go anyhow, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think we can follow you.
Okay, thank you. Well, the first thing is that I feel a bit like an imposter here, because when I'm talking about some kind of approaches to cover wildfire losses, and I am talking from the Consorcio de Compensación de Seguros, which is a public-private partnership example in Spain, but the thing, and in Europe, but the thing is that we are not covering wildfire losses. So we are in the next few minutes, I will try to explain this, to explain the situation, and to also explain how in these three parts of my presentation, and a bit about forests and wildfires in Spain, and then I will go into the nucleus of how wildfire risk is insured in Spain. And as a way of a possible solution, I will present to you the working mechanism that we have in Spain in a public-private partnership to cover some perils which, by the moment, don't cover wildfire. So a bit about the forest in Spain. Well, you know, Spain is like Portugal, not surprisingly, quite a forested country. We have coniferous more to the Mediterranean. We have hardwood forests, especially oaks and evergreen oaks, more to the Atlantic area. And all this area in the southwest, where you know in Portugal very well, because it's what we call the ESA and you call Montado. So it's the same. Yes?
Francisco, sorry to interrupt you, but I believe that you are in the slide 4, but we also seeing the first slide.
I'm really sorry, because I don't know what's wrong with this. Because
just follow. So try to close the presentation or to stop and to restart again.
I have. I'm really sorry about these problems, because I'm going to share my full screen, and then I'm going to see if now you can see the presentation.
Now we are in the slide 4. So if try to change. Yeah, now I think it's done. Try to change the slides just to see if now we can see it.
Okay, thank you, and apologies for the technical problem.
Don't worry, it's not a problem.
So, well, I was mentioning about this area in southwest and west Spain, which is the Montado, the Dehesa in Spain, which is an open forest with evergreen oak. That is the aziñeira that you say, our encina. So, as for maybe this can be something counterintuitive, but in the past years, the surface area in Spain has been growing. In the past 30 years, it has growth about 30%, which is a good is something of a good news. The reasons mainly the abandonment of all these rural areas in which you have marginal agricultural production that have been abandoned by means of a process of natural reforestation. The natural forests and the natural forest area have been growing in the past decades. So Spain is covered, Portugal is 36% of the country, and Spain is very much alike. 37% of the surface of the country is covered by forests. If you take in absolute terms, Spain is the second country in Europe after Sweden with much more forestal area, and that is good news. Talking about wildfires, there's also some good news in the last 4 decades, in which, if you consider the mean of affected forested area by wildfires, we have had a significant reduction. Although the number of wildfires is not so, the surface affected is reduced significantly. So we have by year the mean is less than half than we had in the 80s. So that probably have to do with the very good distinguishing services that we have in the regions, and also this picture, for instance, is a special military unit that is devoted to emergencies, actually. So we believe they do a good job, and they are very proactive in extinguishing wildfires. But in the recent years, in 2022, we had it was the worst fire seasons in decades, and we have about 300,000 hectares burned, which is the triple of the mean of the last years. And by this year, we are in the middle of the year, we also have a significant number of wildfires. You can see here in this surface image how we had in the Castellón area close to the Mediterranean, north of Valencia, a typical summer wildfire in the month of March, which is something that drives us to reflection in terms of how probably the peril itself is changing, and probably driven by the climate change. Also, as for the number of wildfires by municipality, not surprisingly, as well, the number of wildfires is higher in the areas which are very much like the north of Portugal. So it's Galicia and Asturias and Cantabria, these areas in which we also have a lot of eucalyptus trees, and the number of wildfires there by municipality is significantly higher than in the rest of the country. One thing that is relevant in how wildfire risk is not really affecting very much the country is that Spain, or at least the people, are not very much concerned in terms of insurance and property, is that Spain is actually an atom. So you have here the metropolitan area of Madrid with more than 6 million people, and the rest of the population is along the coasts. So in the middle, there's literally nothing. And that's what the forests, most of the forests are. That means that we can have a very big, like the ones we had last year in Zamora, here in the Sierra de la Culebra fire, that is on for many weeks, but doesn't really affect many properties because there's no one living there. And you can also see that in this map of this wildland urban interface representation which are the red dots in Spain, and also in this map by province. And there you can see how the conjunction between WUIs and a larger share of the population is higher. So that should be in the north of Catalonia, also in the Madrid region, and along the Mediterranean coast where the risk is higher. And so far, we have been lucky, be it because of some awareness, be it because of the effectiveness of the wildfire services, extinguishing services, that we haven't witnessed yet a large fire affecting many properties. And that's probably the reason why the concern in the insurance sector, and the is not very high, and the insurance availability is not an issue so far in Spain. And with this magnificent example of WUI near Madrid, I will go to the point of how does insurance tackle wildfire risk in Spain. We have to differentiate three issues. The first, property and business interruption. They are covered under the fire covers of fire or multi-risk insurance policy by private insurance. That means that this is the exact same situation as in Portugal or in many countries. There is not a pool to cover wildfire risk in Spain, because practically all policies cover fire in the perils covered, and they don't differentiate between fire from within the house or wildfire. That means that they are covered. In personal injury, the general case is exactly the same. Any policy covering life and accident policies issued by and indemnified by private insurance should cover the accidents of individuals affected by a wildfire. But there is a particular case, and the Spanish law establishes that while putting out a wildfire, there is a specific policy which is contracted by the Ministry of Ecological Transition with my company, with Consorcio de Compensación de Seguros, which is a public insurer. And in this case, if a professional or an amateur extinguisher of a wildfire is affected or dead, it's covered by this policy contracted with us. And this is valid for Spain, but also for professional firefighters that, for instance, go to Portugal or France or Morocco or Italy to help in extinguishing wildfires. And the third point has to do with the cover of crops. Wildfire is among the perils that can be indemnified by crop insurance. That means if you have a maize field and it is surrounded by a forest, and the forest sets fire and the maize field is affected, it can be indemnified by the crop insurance. And also the forests themselves can be insured under the crop insurance scheme. This is not a very popular cover, but well, now we are in the insurance, the agricultural insurance scheme is covering about 1,300 policies, covering some 62,000 hectares in the country. Normally, these are devoted to covering forest production, that is to protect wood plantations. But in the past few weeks, we had some requests from companies that are planting trees in order to offset their emissions, in asking us if these forests could also be covered by agricultural insurance. And the answer is yes. So they probably could take the same covers that for any other forest production, or maybe in the agricultural insurance they should design a specific policy for these companies that are offsetting their emissions planting forests. So this is a new line in regarding insurance and forests. And for the working PPPs in Spain, that is the third and last part of the presentation, I am going to talk a bit about the Consorcio de Compensación de Seguros, which is the public enterprise in which I work. And there are three main ways to cover natural hazards in Spain. Some of them are directly covered by the market, exactly like in Portugal. And as I said, wildfire is among them, covered directly by the market. Some others like flood, coastal flood, windstorm, earthquake, tsunami, volcanic eruption, and meteorite falling are covered under the umbrella of the extraordinary risk insurance, of which I will deal very briefly later. And the agricultural sector is covered by a pool of many, about 20 companies in which the public insurer consortium takes part, and of which consortium is also the reinsurer. There is a 50% subsidy in the premiums, and they, as I said, can also cover agricultural production and forest productions. So as for the extraordinary risk insurance, which can be a way of an inspiration of trying to set a pool covering wildfires, say in Portugal, there is practically any policy sold in Spain covering property, business interruption, and personal injury is a dual one. One, which is the original, underwritten by any private insurer with its ordinary covers. They have freedom to set premiums, and there is another cover, another layer of cover, which is for the so-called extraordinary risks. And the key is that by law in Spain, it is compulsory to have the extension to cover some listed extraordinary risks, which are the ones that I said before: flood, windstorm, tornado, etc. But also some man-made risks such as terrorism, riots, etc. The way that this mechanism works is that we apply a surcharge on the insured value of the kind of risk, and in the event of one property or person being affected, insured property or insured person being affected by one of those listed perils, it is us who pay directly to the policyholder on the basis of the policy sold by the market company. So we don't sell policies, but we use all the policies in the market. These are our rates. I don't have time, but you will have them in the presentation. The idea is that now we are covering nearly 140 million policies in Spain, of which more than 60 million policies are property policies, which an insured capital in property, which is the blue lines, of more than 6 trillion euros. That is roughly 4 times the Spanish GDP. And that means that we have the geographical diversity that our Californian friends mentioned before to cover very different perils, and we apply a flat rate. Like I said before, wildfire is not included, but we have a permanent dialogue with the insurance sector. And like Marie said before, it can be or could be one of the perils that should be included in an indeterminate future, in the event that should become a concern for the sector. And I apologize for taking a bit longer than my time. Thank you very much.
No problem, Francisco. It was very good presentation as well. Thank you very much for it. So now we'll pass to Dario Oliveira de Matos. No, sorry. Dario Matos, that will talk from Munich, and we'll talk about the acceptance of fire insurance risks affecting dwellings in rural areas. So the perspective of the reinsurance market. So now it's the reinsurance market that we'll talk about. Dario, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak about this important peril that is wildfire and how we perceive it as being a market player for Portugal. I myself work for Munich Re for more than 16 years, most of the time for the Latin American market, and my current responsibilities involve the renewal of property treaty contracts, reinsurance contracts in Colombia and in Portugal. Therefore, I have some experience regarding the subject, and my idea is to speak a little bit about wildfires in the world. Thankfully, we already spent quite some time from the previous speakers in such an overview, so we could go more swiftly here. Then a little bit about wildfires and reinsurance, and some messages that we as reinsurers would like to convey to the market. So first of all, and by the way, the picture is from the Madeira wildfire in 2016. So that's an actual picture from Portugal. So we had already our colleagues from California speaking about the view in the US market. Here's some numbers just for comparison. So the first graph in gray, we have the top 20 most destructive wildfires in California up to December 2016. And we can see in just a few years' time, last time this graphic was updated was 2021, how the loss panorama changed. So all the red bars you can see are losses in California since 2017. And the camp loss that was mentioned is in the top, as you can see. And the measure here is total destroyed structures per year. It's not number or the monetary damage, but just the number of structures, meaning houses, warehouses, or any other such structure that was affected by the wildfire. And we can see that there was a trend of increasing it. In 2019, it had a break, and then we are seeing enhancement of this number of structures being affected as well again. So we as reinsurers really think of this data as factual proof that climate change is affecting our exposure to risk. And so that you don't think it's just a reinsurer selling their own product, two different sources as well developed projects for assessing this. So here in the first graph, you can see this projection of what would be the wildfires in the US without climate change, and the projection that's actually what is happening now, the wildfires with climate change. And on the other hand, the Australian government projections on how the fire danger index has increased in the last 50 years or 60 years. So it's really a major concern for ourselves. And as we have been documenting loss events all over the world for more than 40 years, this is a small graph of the loss events in Europe, and of highlight is the heat wave from 2003 that was really disruptive and affected Portugal as well. And as we all know, we are having currently a wildfire going on. This is from last week actually, and how the skies in New York were affected by the wildfires in Canada. So this is a real concern and a material concern for the present day. And nevertheless, what does reinsurance has to do with this? So wildfires are seen traditionally as non-peak perils, meaning peak perils being understood as hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquake, and such. The old nomenclature, the old terminology was secondary perils and primary perils, but this is no longer the case, as we have seen that it's not a matter of which risks or perils are the first ones to be priced and the secondary ones later on, but just the characteristic of the peril, peak perils and non-peak perils. And of course, many factors contribute to the ignition and spread of forest fires that we have already seen here. So we have human factors playing a role, topographic variables, meteorological variables, vegetation variables. So if you have a long drought season within the area, if you have unmaintained areas with dead trees laying around just to being able to feed the fires that spread, if you have convection system that approaches it and spreads sparks over a wide area. So, and we have to understand this, that due to these many factors that contribute to a wildfire, modeling a wildfire is complex and it's difficult. Not only to produce the model, but to manage it. But of course, we have seen all the fires that was raged across not only California, but other states in the United States and in Australia as well. We are quite acquainted with the situation in Southern Europe, especially Portugal, Spain. So this is a peril that has to be modeled and has to be priced accordingly. It has to be reserved so that us reinsurers and our clients are able to pay the proper indemnification for the insurers whenever they are hit by such an event. And we reinsurers are investing on this. Of course, there is certain limitation from the insurance sector, and the news that I put here in this slide from 2023 is from 2 weeks ago. And it was actually stating this, that in California, they have a huge issue due to the way the California's statutory limitations on risk modeling are drafted. So state regulations in California ask wildfire insurance to set rates for annual catastrophic coverage as a fraction of damage accrued over 20 years. Meaning they are, due to regulation, limited to old models and that do not reflect the most modern practices. And that is to develop an actual rate map and to assess each risk individually, not only by accruing mathematical average over 20 years of losses. So that's an actual thing that's happening in California nowadays, and that's moving insurance companies away from that state. So even some major players are moving away. For instance, this news was mentioning specifically the case of State Farm and all state insurance companies. But it's a major concern for all the players in the market that these kinds of risks are modeled properly, they are accrued and reserved properly, and therefore that they are able to contribute to the whole environment of the insurance and reinsurance market. And just to have an overview on the situation, I would like to mention the two largest losses. That is the 2003 heat wave event. That's the highest economic loss to date that happened in Portugal. And the bad thing is that the insured values not really consolidated for the market, but we know for a fact that over 2,000 households burned to the ground in this event. And the economic losses were estimated by Portugal authorities at the time in exceeding 1 billion euros. If we apply inflation now, we are talking about 1.5 billion euros to a value of the state. And it was a major loss event, and it just showed back then that the market was underinsured. And the largest insured loss to date, of course, is the 2017 events, and we are talking about two wildfire events, meaning the Pedro Grande event from June and the Iberian wildfires from October. It spread over Spain and Portugal, and putting them both together, we are again at the magic figure of 1.5 billion euros of economic loss. The insured loss for the 2017 October event is, it depends on the source, you are talking about a range between 225 million euro to 244 or 270 even million euros. But the event in October is regarded as being kept at short of 900 million euros. So just show that it's 1/4 to 1/5 of the risks are insured. This is a huge gap that we have as an industry to fulfill, to step up and help our clients to enable these risks to be insurable. And of course, if we look at the wildfire trends, we can see that there is a certain decrease in the number of fires, but there's a high variability in the area burned each year. And if we account for all the areas that has been burned ever since 1980, meaning 42 years, the time span, we are talking about 1/3 of Portugal burned to the crisp. Meaning it is a matter of concern. And as mentioned before, we see that this is climate change proof. And this is a really concerning thing if we consider trends. So once again, individual scientific publications estimated the increase of the fire weather index for the Southern Europe, the region that affects Portugal as well, meaning that we are more likely to see such huge fire events repeating in the foreseeable future, meaning we have to take measures. And the main messages that Munich Re would like to convey as a conclusion is, first of all, as a reinsurer, we have seen in the renewal of our treaties in the last years, the major driver for the largest wildfire losses for reinsurance is large plants and warehouses in areas susceptible to wildfires. And we would like to assure the participants that in our treaties, there is currently no restriction whatsoever to the acceptance of fire insurance on dwellings in rural area. The issue is whether these risks are insurable at all, meaning as what it was mentioned already from some panelists, the material of the building, the age of the building, the measures that are taken for this building to be manageable or insurable. And if we are talking about historical buildings, I see very little interest from the insurance market to provide cover for them as such. And as well, concern of the reinsurers regarding earthquake, we're talking about another type of peril, is regarding the construction code and the building materials of the risks that are fed into the reinsurance treaties. And we see this as a healthy concern. And for areas exposed to wildfires, we see as a healthy movement from the market in some areas, just like in California, the enforcement of building adequacy to this peril as well. And we would like to present the question to the market, if it's there any information in this regard for Portugal. I would hope we see some movements in this direction in the future to enable more risks to be insurable. And of course, we mentioned a bit about modeling. We as reinsurers invest time and money and resource on models. We have made great strides regarding wildfire rate maps in the US, not only for California, but for other states as well, in Australia as well. And we would like to do the same thing for Portugal. The biggest issue, the biggest point that's limiting us in that regard is that we need a more detailed GEL code than the current market standard. So currently, as Portugal is exposed to earthquake, we receive the aggregation of risks from our clients for this specific peril in a postcode 2 or postcode 4 code, but that's not enough for developing a wildfire rate map. We would need address level or latitude longitude level. And frankly speaking, this is an endeavor that is possible. As I mentioned before, I am responsible for Colombia as well as for Portugal, and all of my Colombian clients provide us with latitude longitude data regarding their risks pool for earthquake. So if for earthquake that's possible, I would see in Colombia, I would see no reason for this not being market movement in the short or medium term for Portugal as well, to ensure a better insurability of risks, and therefore as an industry that we convey to our clients the protection that they need and they are entitled to. And with these words, I would like to finish my participation and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daria. It's a really interesting presentation. So now we will have Nuno Rodrigues from MDS, Mediadora de Seguros, so it's insurance intermediary or insurance broker. And Nuno will talk about the insurance solutions for the protection of dwellings in rural areas, especially in the parametric insurance. So,
thank you, Miguel.
Nuno,
So I think I'm ready. Thank you. Good morning to everybody.
Thank you.
As Miguel was saying, my name is Nuno Rodrigues. I work for MDS Portugal, which is the largest broker, insurance broker operating in the Portuguese market. And I'm here to speak about something which is of high interest. And I hope to convince you about the good things about parametric insurance. So I guess that parametric insurance is a new word for many of you here, but in fact, parametric insurance has been around since the 90s. However, the recent developments in terms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT, and also satellite imagery have created the chance for the parametric insurance to reach the mass markets, to become more massified. So parametric insurance, throughout this webinar, we have been speaking about what we call the traditional insurance, which is also known as indemnity insurance. So, for example, a typical example is our home policy. If there is a fire and our home policy burns, then the damage needs to be checked and validated by a loss adjuster, and thereafter you might receive an indemnity. Parametric insurance doesn't work that way. So parametric insurance covers the probability or the chance of happening an event. That event can be an earthquake, a hurricane, a hailstorm, or a wildfire, which is a case that we are speaking here today. For wildfires and for any type of perils that the parametric provides cover to, we need to predefine the parameters for which that parametric insurance is going to work. That's why it's also known as an index-based insurance, a little bit like the stock market, if you want to think like that way. For wildfires, the typical parameters can be so the location of the fire, the fire, the power of the fire, let's go this way, the fire intensity, and most commonly used sorry, I don't see the screen very well. The large fire potential index, which is a composite index and takes into consideration, for example, the soil moisture, and also if the forest around the area that we want to cover is dry or not. So how does the parametric insurance work? So as I was saying, we need to set, the insurance company needs to set with the clients, first of all, the parameters that are going to be used, and also what we call the limit of indemnity, or what is covered. So This type of insurance doesn't provide cover to a sum insured, so we don't need to calculate, for example, the sum insured of the houses or the sum insured of, let's look, for example, as an example of an industrial plant. So we don't need to take in consideration the sum insured. What we need to set is the limit of the indemnity and the parameters that are going to be used. For example, on the screen, we can see a typical example that is being used to provide cover for fires affecting forests. We set the insured area, the location. We set also the value per hectare. And then if the fire occurs and the parameters are fulfilled, so we check the burdened area. In this case, it's 2,000 acres, for example. We know the value per hectare and the indemnity is easily calculated. The good thing about the parametric insurance for wildfires is that it tends to have a binary approach, which is or it is covered or it isn't. So there isn't a big space or big room or the need to discuss what happened, etc., etc. As I was saying before, parametric insurance is all about data, it's all about technology. So for example, on the screen, we can see pictures from the Landsat satellites, the Landsat 9 from NASA. These are very powerful satellites. Europe also has the ERA satellites. In the case of the land satellites, the land satellites scan the Earth surface every 3 hours. So they generate a huge amount of data. And what parametric insurance uses is this data together with artificial intelligence algorithms to check if, in fact, a fire happened and the severity of that fire. This makes the parametric insurance a very transparent insurance. Everybody knows, let's face it, that insurance can be a little bit dodgy. We all know the small lines. The parametric insurance tends to clarify those small lines because you set the parameters quite clearly. The parameters need to be, so they need to correlate with data provided by independent third-party institutes such as NASA, weather institutes, etc., etc. And so this becomes a really clear type of insurance. It's something that is really welcome on insurance markets. The advantages of the parametric insurance comparing with the traditional insurance are many. For example, first of all, they provide a very quick response, which is vital for the communities. So they provide immediate liquidity to the communities. Why is that so? Since the parametric insurance covers the event occurrence and not if there are damages or not, it doesn't matter if the houses burn or not, it doesn't matter if the highways burn or not, as long as there is a fire and the parameters are fulfilled, immediately there is an indemnity. So this means that the insurance companies selling parametric insurance can provide indemnities in a space, in a time lapse, in a time frame of 30 days, for example. The traditional insurance takes more time to handle the claims. We've seen in the past, for example, in the Pedrógão Grande and other major wildfires in Portugal, in fact, when the traditional insurance is used, the first obstacle is to have enough loss adjusters to check what happened each and every house. So each and every house needs to be checked. That doesn't happen with parametric insurance. So parametric insurance can be the first pillow of financial support to the communities, to the people. This is very important. Since we are talking about huge amounts of data and very high-tech artificial intelligence algorithms, the granularity or the resolution of the satellites nowadays enable to provide cover to either large fires, such as Pedrógão Grande, for example, but also to scattered smaller fires, which has also happened in Portugal. This is important because this provides an additional level of cover to who needs most. We saw comments today about the protection gap. Parametric insurance is seen as a great tool to fight the protection gap. This is very important, especially for Portugal, because as we see from EIOPA, Portugal is very prone to wildfires, let's face it. We are now, for example, on the edge, on the 24th of this month, we are going to see the first big heat wave in Portugal. So we are going to have problems in Portugal, unfortunately. And also, at the same time, Portugal is the country in Europe on which the protection gap is the highest. So very few people have insurance nowadays for their homes, despite being compulsory in some types of houses. And therefore the protection gap is huge. Another thing that we saw the problems in, for example, in the States, in the California market, for example, it's very difficult nowadays to obtain cover. Parametric insurance is getting in those markets as a way to provide cover where there isn't cover, so or where that cover is very expensive to be affordable to the common clients. And also, parametric insurance can be seen as a good complement for catastrophe insurance, as we have been speaking to throughout the day. This is a key point, which is parametric insurance shall not be seen as a replacement of the traditional insurance, but as a complement. And this is very important because we should not switch from one type of insurance to other. We need to have both types of insurance working in order to provide the best risk transfer levels to the community. Another interesting aspect from the parametric insurance is the fact that we can even say that it gives a sexy appeal to the insurance industry. The insurance industry tends to be seen as a boring one, not very appealing, frozen in time, but in fact, the parametric insurance is very dynamic. Just to give you 2 examples of this dynamics, we are seeing, unfortunately, the huge clouds of smoke due to the fires in Canada, which, by the way, are on the path to Portugal. They should arrive to Azores tomorrow, so we are going to have problems also in Portugal. And immediately there are now studies for specific types of parametric insurance that are going to provide cover for the damages of the smoke. You tend to think, okay, how can I be affected by the smoke, except in what regards my health? We can take an example to the airliners. If there is too much smoke, the planes cannot fly. For example, just to give you an example, even if there is too much smoke on the highway, we cannot drive. So this can have a financial impact. It can create even business interruption. Another example of the use of parametric insurance nowadays is in Australia. Our friend from Consortia, Francisco Espesa, was given an example, which is being covered in Australia by parametric insurance, which is to protect the forests which are being planted in carbon offsetting projects. So many of the private companies that are trying to find cover on the traditional market in Australia, they are having difficulties to protect the huge forests, and they are finding solutions on the parametric insurance. So I hope that you enjoy parametric insurance. I hope that you start studying parametric insurance. We may be seeing in the near future what is called hybrid policies, which is, imagine your home policy have a blend of the traditional indemnity insurance to provide damages to theft, typical fire, burglary, and also have a layer of parametric cover which provides cover to your house if your house is not affected by fire. But imagine that you cannot go there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Sometimes when we have a huge wildfire, the damages, so the level of affectation to roads and other public utilities can be very high, which means that we can have difficulties in getting water supply for weeks, communications, even energy. So sometimes our houses survives, but we do have financial losses because we cannot, for example, keep our freezer working. So that's one of the strengths of parametric insurance. I hope you have enjoyed. Thank you for everything. And let's keep in touch. Miguel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nuno. We enjoyed a lot. Thank you. So we finished this first part of the webinar with the presentations. So we had several good quality presentations. I hope you have liked it. And now we will pass to another part of the webinar, that is so a debate, and then the roundtable that will be coordinated and moderated by Inês. So Inês, now the micro is yours. Thank you, everybody, for the presentations from my part, but I will come later.
Well,
please, Inês.
Well, thank you, everybody. I was here furiously taking notes and pointing down the questions, but I really enjoyed all the presentations. And I'm going to try to separate the issues because some of them, maybe they are more prone to the debate, to the debating part, and other are more like direct. So I will try to organize the questions. And what I saw was that in regard of the first part, so before the break, there's a big line that crosses many of the presentations, which has to do with certification. So although this question reappeared and I myself posed it in regard of several speakers, I'm going possibly to put it more transversally because I think it's quite pertinent. So it has to do with the certification of compliance with good practices for the building of houses and for land use and management of combustible materials. And there are several questions there. I'm going to maybe to ask Rodrigo to speak because he was one of those who was questioned about it. So how would he see an ideal system? Should those certifications be done by private entities, namely insurers? And a question that here could be put to Pascal Maya has to do with explaining better the resistance of the insurance sector in France. Did it have to do with costs of like verification costs? But so I would, coming back to the question that I was posing to Rodrigo, and then I'll pose to other speakers. Should it be done by private entities, insurers or others, or should it be done by public entities? Well, that would be, and should it be, of course, the second part of this question is, and should it be mandatory or not? And which universe should it affect? Only new buildings, as has been the issue in California, because many of the houses were destroyed. So even the land use planning could be kind of rethought. Should it affect only new houses, or should it be also mandatory to retrofit all houses? There are like these two big lines concerning certification. And I'm going to ask first Rodrigo, how would he see an ideal system? And then I'll pass on more or less the same question.
Okay, thank you, Ines. So the certification here and the question that was raised, one specific question that was raised was how would the certificate work if houses in rural areas are not covered, are not subject to mandatory fire insurance? And the discussions that have been had around this, and they're just this at this point, discussions of the certificate that states good practice, adherence to good practices, would be something that would be facultative, but could be translated into benefits from the insurance side, because much of what was discussed between the Portuguese Insurers Association and the House Refuge Project was that we want that there should be advantages or benefits to for one side, there's comfort from the companies to write this risk, and there's also incentives to private homeowners to seek solutions for this. And the certificate, which would probably be something that would be made by official institutes or private services, not relating to insurers, because of the question that we mentioned before, that for mass risks, providing this service would be very difficult to justify. The costs and also the administrative processes would be very complex. We were seeing this more as something as a certification, an additional certification that could have other type of benefits beyond the insurance part. On the insurance part, most of what we discussed is that currently the benefits are still open to discussion. It will depend on the decision of each insurer, how they will position themselves on this. But on a very broad spectrum, it could be something from accepting the risk or not, or it could have a definite advantage to the terms and conditions of the insurance, the coverages, the deductibles, or the premium. It depends on how the market will adhere to this, both in terms of how the individuals will seek out this cover. There are other types of benefits that have been put out, but which are not sure yet if they could be applicable. For instance, fiscal benefits or other types of benefits. In the past, when the fire insurance started becoming mandatory for horizontal property, there was a benefit that whoever had fire insurance had a reduction in the contribution to the I'm not sure the term in English, but it was contribuição autárquica. So this mechanism already existed in the past as a way to encourage potential insureds to seek insurance. And so when we see the perspective of this, it would have to be something that probably regulated by the state, probably certified by third parties, and the benefits could be relating to insurance, but probably should be more than that to encourage adherence to the certificate.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very rich question because it also has to do with the participation of the public sector and also some sort of subsidization. So we will come back to this topic on the debate because I think it also connects with administrative law, and now we have those who will also participate in the debate. I will follow on to some specific questions to the several speakers. And Marie also already answered some questions that were put on the Q&A, and I have, before we have many issues in the debate, but now a very specific question. So just a clarification, which lines of insurance would have to comply with the extra wildfire capital requirements, just for me to have a more clear picture? Oh, there's something with the sound.
I can hear you, Inês.
I cannot hear as well.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah.
No, yeah. No. Okay. Now it's better. Now you can hear me now. Yes.
I do.
Okay. Did you hear the question, Marie, or no?
Yes, I could hear the question.
I was without my AirPods. Sorry.
No, so if I understood your question properly, as of today, there is no capital requirement for wildfire, so it's not included in the standard formula. But we are currently now starting an exercise in 23 and 24 to actually start monitoring wildfire, because we recognize, we heard before on the presentation from Munich Re about, moving from wildfire was seen as a secondary peril, but now there is more and more attention to it. So indeed, we will start monitoring, and for that, we need models and data.
It was a very broad question, so to say, and more clarification. If you would add more solvency capital requirements, which lines of insurance would have to comply with those capital? It's a very not very deep, so to say, question, but just a clarification.
Yes, as we might see in Europe, my understanding would be that wildfire would be mainly under fire and other damaged property. That would be my expectations, but it could be, and we need more information, but it could be that sometimes wildfire is also insured a bit differently, because we see in Europe, it can vary significantly between different countries.
Yes, and it can affect so many spheres. That's where my and Rodrigo maybe want to react to this.
Yes, so I just wanted to add that I think that this is indirectly quantified currently, not in the standard formula, but in the additional exercises of the in-need formula, events not in data, which are part of the solvency requirements, because it's the place that currently companies have to set capital aside or protection aside for this type of exposure. And the lines of business are mostly property, fire, and other damages. Although we have discussed, there's been some discussion on the affectation, for instance, of insurance for personal damage, such as life insurance, such as workman's compensation insurance, and also for motor hull. It could, but the impact is mostly on fire property.
Yes, that was part of my question, and I do imagine that somehow insurance companies already take account of it, but that will become more standardized or more regulated in the future. So I will advance, and I would like to pose a question to Francisco Espejo, and I'm using my prerogatives as a moderator also to place questions that that came up to my mind. And an issue that is common in many public guarantee funds is the issue of sustainability. We know that from guarantee funds that have to do with stepping in cases of liability, in some part of the existence or of the life of the public fund, and of course, Consorcio is not a public fund, it's a public-owned company, but it's a public estate, so to say. There arise issues of calculating for payments that have to be made. It has a reason in compensation schemes in New Zealand, for instance, in the responsibility. And as we are saying, it's very difficult to model this kind of risks, catastrophic risks. And I was wondering, how was Consorcio coping with this trouble of modeling? Is the financial sustainability, has it been an issue? Or is the fact of having public support and background balances it out?
Okay, thank you, Ines, for the question. Actually, I would say it's easier, because we do not need, unlike any insurer that has to put a price on a particular location for a particular period of time, they have to be more precise in modeling the particular level of risk in that particular property. What we do is that we cover a bunch of perils for the whole country, and for a long time, because we are working with all the existing policies and not a particular policy. That means that the aggregation is valid. And so to say, for us, climate models are valid, because you know that climate takes normally a 30-year term period. And next year we will be 70. That means that we have been evolving with the market. So you have, in order to calculate your fare, you have to take into account the evolution of the different perils, of course. Some of them are very recurrent. Flood, for instance, is practically 70% of what we pay is flood, and it is a very well-known peril. Others not so. Tsunami, that's also affects Portugal, and earthquakes, for instance. So for these perils we model them, and the second leg is the evolution of the market. We are working with the whole market. So you have another component in which how many people takes insurance or not, and the insured value. So the system is coupled with the evolution of the market. So it also might look counterintuitive, but in the past years, we reduced our fares because the market was healthy, meaning that we had enough revenue to have enough funds to cover that. So, of course, if we would include some new perils, wildfire, for instance, we should have to make new calculations. But in general, for us, climate projections are valid. Normally, for a particular insurer that has to underwrite a policy for a year, they don't actually know how to incorporate this information in a 30-year term for the year 2024, for instance. And but being so huge, working for many perils for the whole country, for 60-something million of property policies, it's kind of helpful for us to calculate this because we don't have to be so precise in a way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's interesting to see this mutualization of risks, also different risks were functioning so well. Sorry, there's some question in the chat, but I'll proceed and then I'll go to the question that is being placed in the chat. And that will lead me to Dario, following the order of the presenters. Yes, to Dario, yes. And one issue, it's not so much specifically regarding reinsurance, sorry, but as you have knowledge and exposure to many different countries, I was just wondering, a question that also will affect the role of insurance and how insurance, in what occasions will there be a bigger contact between insurer and insured, is the issue of the duration of insurance contracts. If they are yearly and renewable, if they are long-term contracts, this affects not only issues of sustainability of the business lines, but also issues regarding a new moment, at least, to exchange documents, to make documental proof of whether some requirements are being met. And my question, which possibly you as reinsurer know or have an idea, is do you have a notion of how this kind of insurance products are tailored? Are they yearly and renewable? Do they tend to be long-term fire insurance contracts? I don't know if you are aware of this.
Normally, policies for fire are renewable for 12 months.
Okay.
There are cases for longer periods, but usually they are reserved for larger, not only engineering, but larger projects that demand more complex placement, and therefore we are talking about facultative, not treaty business. But I've seen policies up to 24 months. They are not, by far, not quite common. The most majority of the business we see are 12-month policies.
Okay, thank you. This question also came up to me because you were mentioning the Californian example, and I was thinking, well, this will affect differently different insurance contracts. If they are renewable, then you'll see a runoff and escape from the market by the insurers. If they are long-term, you can see issues of sustainability of the line. So, but I'm saving some more other issues for the debate. Now I'm just putting more direct questions. And so now I will go to, I would like to ask questions to Nuno Rodrigues. And you have a question by Valentina Baciu, who asked if there are examples of community-based insurance products for wildfire that also include possible prevention measures with the aim to reduce the premium.
So, as far as I know, I don't. We talk a little bit, and for example, we talk a little bit about that. There is an issue with fire prevention measures and insurance market, which is insurance markets does not have the means to help the communities in terms of improving the firefighting measures. So, as far as I know, I don't know any working system which combines insurance, community-based insurance, and real means on the ground. There is a long debate about it. We have touched the surface around this day, but in fact, the risk awareness sometimes is quite low even, and it starts by that. When we don't have yet high levels of risk awareness, we saw, for example, our colleague from Consortium saying that in Spain, where there are fires, there are no assets or nothing, so people don't care too much. So it's difficult to combine, as Rodrigo was saying, to join the two worlds in the middle term. So we still have a long path to follow as an insurance market, as a community, as all of us as individuals. We still have a long path to follow in terms of putting this community-based insurance working together and closely to the communities, and in fact mitigating the risks, which is what we are talking about.
I have two more questions regarding parametric insurance, which are more direct. So I'll place them now. And then there are other issues that are being put forth in the Q&A, but I'll save them for the debate. I was just here making a selection. Some of them will transition to the debate. But now, in regard of parametric insurance,
you choose the questions, one or two. You choose the niches.
I think they are quite direct. First of them, what is the cover of parametric insurance in Portugal? Are you aware of how many policies exist with this type of cover?
So, excellent question. Parametric insurance works quite well in what regards climate change, catastrophic events, everything that is also weather related, but also provides other types of covers. In Portugal, we have so far policies covering things like earthquake as a complement to the traditional policies. We have policies, for example, providing cover for the private forests from the pulp papers such as Portucel, for example. They have huge amounts of investment on those forests. It's their main supply chain, so they protect parametric insurance. We have several policies, for example, in the south of Portugal, providing cover to special types of crops such as apricots. Also for the cannabis industry, they are using in Portugal for the cannabis production, the legal one, of course, to protect their crops, because the traditional crop insurance does not work in that. We have cases also in our coast, which they use parametric insurance to protect the aqua farms that exist, for example, in Algarve. So if the waves become higher enough to damage the structure of the aqua farms, the parametric insurance answers for that. So we have plenty of cases nowadays in Portugal. I would say we don't have thousands of policies yet, or I would say hundreds of policies, because the parametric insurance is still not very well known from the general public. Even there aren't too many insurance companies in Portugal selling on a normal basis that type of insurance, but every day it's becoming more common and more popular.
It's time we transition to the debate, although I will just place one last question, and then I'll bring some
maybe
questions.
The one from Maria Lucrece, which is an interesting one, and we can talk a little bit the following question. I'm following the order.
Oh, yes.
Which is also an interesting question.
How do you analyze and confirm the cause of the fire to assure that the event was not human caused and specifically owner caused? And what is the cost of this insurance compared with traditional insurance?
This is a very important question, even because one of the nightmares to the insurance companies, it's the fraud. So insurance companies spend millions fighting frauds. Of course, it's complicated to say that a man-made fire, let's go this way, it's a fraud, because the victims have nothing to do with that, but it's not an easy issue to tackle. There are no simple solutions. What the parametric insurance industry uses are very developed machine learning algorithms, which can, together with the satellite image, try to pinpoint, for example, if a fire starts in multiple places at the same time. And then something is strange, because, you know, it's not common to have a fire with multiple starting points at the same time in a close distance. And unfortunately, we have seen a lot of cases in Portugal, people using fire traps and other types of tools to create fire, but it's not easy. The insurance market relies on technology to try to pinpoint which fires are natural and which ones are not human caused. Anyway, even if a fire is human caused, it doesn't mean that there is no cover. So the parametric insurance will provide cover anyway. So this is not an issue for the parametric cover. Although, of course, maybe some type of, if the person that causes a fire is discovered and goes to jail, maybe there might be some kind of subrogation rights, if there is any chance, of course.
Okay, interesting, because I thought it was just a very linear product in that sense that if a trigger event happened, then the payment would be done. But
that's the idea. That's the idea.
It's interesting. So many of these questions will also come back in the debate, but I think it's to comply with our schedule, we should now transition. And I think here we can find two major lines also in this concern to overcome a risk protection gap. And there are like two sides to overcoming this risk protection gap or to bridging it. One is how to make insurers accept more risk. And we have seen here several options: certification, public insurance or insurance, parametric insurance. And the other side of this bridge has to do with how to bring more clients to contract insurance, which is also not a given, as we have seen in that dashboard by EIOPA in the south of Europe, where many people don't have the resources, don't have the culture. So as we focus, Dario has asked a question. I'll just...
If I may, I think a third point plays a role there as well. Sorry for interrupting.
No, please.
And this third point would be how to make more risks insurable, because there is the question of risks that exist and that insurers are not able to provide any cover because they are below what the insurance industry regards as minimum standards for providing cover.
No, I totally agree. It would be part of my first side of the question: how to make insurers accept more risk, either in quantitative terms or in qualitative terms. It would be like the first concern of this approach. And the other would be the other side of the market, the client side. And as we dedicated less time to this other side, but it's also an issue, clearly, I would possibly ask Claire, Marie, sorry, Marie Schoda, what kind of, we kind of mentioned it in a previous conversation, but if she could elaborate on what kind of measures could be adopted to create this kind of, Rodrigo also mentioned it, this kind of risk culture, risk mitigation culture that seems to be maybe in other milieus or in regard of other risks. What kind of measures would you see to be useful here?
Yes, no, and thanks for the good question. And indeed, I think it's also addressing protection gap is also looking into this consumer aspects. And so at EIOPA, I mean, we are going to publish also end of June a report who has been looking at the consumer aspects of taking up natural catastrophe insurance coverage, because this differs significantly in Europe. You might have in some southern parts of Europe countries where it's maybe not so much in the culture of the people to take a lot of insurance coverage. Maybe it's more a day-to-day risk view. And then you might have in other countries in Europe where people are taking any type of insurance coverage possible and imaginable. So these are differences. And I think the first thing we are going to work concretely on is about raising risk awareness. Because I think it's always the same, and it's a bit the tricky part of taking up an insurance coverage, is if you haven't been yet impacted by an earthquake or a flood, you might not be incentivized to take an insurance coverage. Why should you pay for something that might maybe happen in the future? But there, I think this is really something where first measure is about increasing the risk awareness in Europe, because we have been conducting surveys, and we realize even in countries like Greece, we did some studies, and where you might see, okay, maybe earthquakes are still happening, people think they will not be impacted by earthquake.
Same would go for Portugal. And just what kind of measures would you see? I remember you mentioned yourself that, which I found very interesting, but maybe you could have remember more examples. I think I'm repeating it correctly. It was during the house sale process in the US that there was some mandatory publicity or information regarding the degree of risk and also the kind of costs that you would have to support regarding measures to counter that risk. Could you maybe explain it? Yeah.
Yes, no, of course. I mean, indeed, by this idea of raising risk awareness, we have been looking around what exists worldwide. And we have, for example, seen in the US, where when people are going to purchase a house, here in Europe, I mean, in Germany, for example, you might see an index of the energy standard of the house. And in the US, they had something similar, but for the risk of flooding, for example. So you would see when you're going to buy a house on the real estate website, you would see the price of the house, nice pictures of the house, but as well the risk profile of your house. And this I found extremely pragmatic, because this is the moment where a family is going to invest the capital in buying a house. And it's also about knowing, okay, what is the risk associated to this house? So this, I personally found it extremely good. And maybe this could be also ideas, next steps for all of us to raise awareness at the right moment when a family is going to engage their capital in buying a house, for example.
Thank you very much. Just to give also a bit of an idea of the topics that seem to be more prone to discussion, I will bring the topic of parametric insurance, of mandatory insurance, just for you to have the notion, and also of how exactly the administrative authorities can be brought to handle this question. And as we have our administrative law expert, those I'll bring her to the debate. But now I'll hand the word to Rodrigo Tomás that has a question.
It's not so much as a question, but in line of what has been said, in the case of Portugal and in this discussion, we do not have here in the panel what we saw in the presentation from the United States. There is really no one to speak for the communities in these discussions in the Portuguese market. Someone that will make the discussion in the presentation saying, if we don't comply with regulations, we might not have coverage available for our risks. And that is something that we saw in the US presentation. That there was someone there who took on responsibility for that discussion and for gathering the individual clients to raise awareness of the risk. Like Marie said, there is no speaker for this here. So the question is very much, how do we get individual clients to massively aggregate? And also, what is the role of local administration in making this discussion and making the case for this?
Well, as you already threw the line towards the a part of this discussion in which I would involve Dulce, maybe we could speak about that directly, and also speak about other experiences, the Spanish experience also, as far as Francisco can help us. But maybe I'll just broaden a bit the question and pass it on to Dulce. How do you see, Dulce, what's the role of the public authorities? Do you think this kind of speaker could be like a public local authority? Or should it be more somebody from the the civil society? And so it's a kind of connected question. How do you see like the role of the public authorities in this enforcement of the rules applicable?
Thank you, Inês, and thank you, Rodrigo. Rodrigo already said a lot. So indeed, when we have such scarce movements and community movements and associations that do follow through with asking for more protection and maybe a new line in terms of insurance, we are kept with the local authorities to try to do this. From my understanding, though, the local authorities so far have not worked a lot on this issue, because what they normally do and their competencies, although they do license and approve constructions or changes to constructions in these areas, in these areas that are prone to fires, it is very difficult to make them introduce, because this has to be legislatively bound, introduce into their own procedures the question of insurance, right? Because as you said, if the insurance, you could define something and in legislation in which local authorities would act upon, according to which if a house would be insured, then maybe it would be more justifiable if you could construct, for instance. But when you don't have a proper framework for insurance, and insurances are not permanent, they are based on a temporal basis, 12 months, it's very difficult to bind it to the construction level, because when you construct, in principle, it's permanent. And so you have to have a wider reach in terms of possible hazards that may affect that dwelling. So in terms of their competencies, legal competencies of public authorities, mainly in what regards construction, I see this is a very difficult pairing of both things. And that is why in the recent legislation in Portugal, the entity that elaborated it tried to get something approved in line with mandatory insurance, but at the end there's only an article saying, well, it's advisable that people are insured, right? So that was the amount of consensus that could be reached. Nonetheless, in terms mostly of community protection, I think local authorities should, in the absence of other movements, and also because it's their responsibility towards their residents, that they do try for a wider net of protection, and particularly within insurance. Even if it's not mandatory, because it's very difficult, but try to find paths where communities that, for instance, this is already happening, that underwent processes of restructuring, reframing, and that are being protected by public financing, that at the end there is something that continues that network of protection of those communities in the wildland interface, so wildland fire interface. So I think this should be something that should be introduced into public policies, mainly at a local level.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask Francisco about, as far as he knows, his experience of how the community is organized. Is it is there this awareness of the importance of insurance? Is it a civil society awareness, or not? Should be like top down?
Okay, well, thank you. As you know, there are some countries, a few countries in Europe, for instance, Switzerland, in which property insurance is compulsory. In other countries, it is not. In Spain, it is not compulsory to have your property insured. But the in-between we take is that if you insure your property, then you will have a bunch of perils compulsorily included. And that is flood, and that is earthquake, and that could be wildfire, for instance. And that's an interesting in-between, because Marie said something before, a key word, which is skin in the game. I think that everyone should have something to lose and something to win as well, if you want to correctly manage a risk. Here in Spain, it is the companies that sell the policies, and it is the insureds, the one who want to be insured. There is no, apart from the mortgages in the bank, etc., there is no binding need for you to insure your house apart from the mortgage. But when you have not all natural perils are covered by consortio. Most of them even are covered: hail, snow, the direct effect of precipitation, landslides. These are market perils. Wildfire. These are market perils. That means that any company has the choice to not to insure a property who is not in a very good condition. But companies have as well a selling argument in telling people that if you insure your house and you pay the mean surcharge for a house in Spain for consortio is 15 euros. and you pay 15 euros more, you will have covered earthquake, terrorist attack, strong winds, flood, etc. So people normally aren't aware that they are paying this, but they see the point. So it's a win-win situation in terms that companies can select the risks.
Mm-hmm.
Once a company underwrites a policy for a given property, then we will have to take it. We have no choice. But the risk selection is on the company's part.
Mm-hmm.
But also having this extension is a selling argument. So in a way, everyone, the policyholders pay less, the companies sell more policies, and in Spain, 3 out of 4 houses have insurance. And that means that 3 houses out of 4 houses have insurance against flood, for instance, unlike other countries in which if you want to have earthquake insurance or flood insurance, that you will have to contract it separately, not in the case of Spain because it is compulsory. And that's the win-win situation. Everyone has something to lose and something to win, and that's a key. But it is a matter of choice. On how do you want to design your scheme. There are many countries that rely on the premium as a risk awareness measure. We do not have that capacity because the premiums or our rates are flat. But what we are actually in favor of is actually in reducing the protection gap and in maximizing the insurance take-up rate as its most extension possible. So this is, I always say, this is a kind of a short gauntlet problem in which you have to decide if you cover your shoulders or you cover your feet, and we are in favor of maximizing take-up rate and maximizing neutralization of risk and cross-subsidization, actually, which is something that in some jurisdiction is not very sexy, but in other countries such as Spain or France, it is. So,
and as you work as an add-on onto the normal pricing of a policy, that's part of selection.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say something, and then to say that, well, I'm moderating, but if anybody wants to react, feel free. I don't want to be too directed, but just to say something that bridges the gap. But I think also here we have in Portugal this absence of a culture to buy insurance, so to say. So if like the client does not wish to search for insurance, is not aware of that danger, then already the first premise would be missing, because you would not have like the demand side would not be functioning. But I will pass the word to Rodrigo.
Yes, I don't want to monopolize the work, but I would just like to add something about the culture risk, which relates to affordability. And the question is, insurance in Portugal has been the perception of insurers has been that insurance in Portugal is considered expensive for what families take at the end of the month. And that is one of the aspects that is going to, that has contributed to the fact that insurance is seen mostly as an obligation. Most insurance is done mandatorily. The 2 main lines of business in the non-life insurance are motor and workers' compensation, which is mandatory by law in Portugal. Life insurance and home insurance are mainly carried not by a legal obligation, but by a contractual obligation when you purchase a house through financing. And those are the main reasons, main distribution channels, and the main reasons why insurance in Portugal is set up, the portfolios are set up the way they are. They are expensive in the general public's view. And on the affordability side of what we have already discussed, the question that Dario mentioned before is, and that Inez also mentioned, if we are talking about creating certificates or good practices for construction, the decision of whether or not to retrofit backwards to risks that are subpar and substandard from the insurance perspective, but need investment, and investment will need funds. And again, the example of the North American example that was set up, that the community felt that they had to need to raise funds to finance that retrofitting. Without the absence of a system that works like that, it's going to increase, hinder further the affordability of insurance, because we have all the substandard risks that, in order to be insured, are either made mandatory by law or need investment to become acceptable. Also, and now throwing the line to a bit more to Nuno about parametric solutions here, because on my perspective, the parametric solutions and what I've seen, parametric solutions are probably a niche, and not all traditional insurance carriers are investing in parametric insurance, and some of them considered it not a good solution or not an interesting solution. What I've seen from parametric insurance positions from traditional insurers are parametric protection measures triggered by the parameter being surpassed from a prevention perspective. And so I would like to ask Nuno to follow up on this topic and all other matters of parametric, because it raised a lot of attention.
Thank you, Rodrigo. You mentioned an interesting point. In fact, the more traditional insurance companies, the incumbent insurance, as sometimes we call it, they are not, generally speaking, they are not paying a lot of attention yet to parametric insurance. So parametric insurance is a niche market. It's mainly being developed by insurtechs. So it's where the insurtechs are growing a lot. This is also connected, maybe, I would say, with some types of requirements in terms of capital, for example, thinking what Marie was saying. So the traditional insurance companies, they do have an issue, which is they try to provide insurance products for life and non-life, for example, so they have huge needs of capital. And therefore, this opens a space for the insurtechs, which only sell, for example, parametric insurance, period. And they are able to access to alternative capital, market capitals. That's why, even, as you know, and parametric insurance is seen as an alternative risk transfer mechanism, and not as a typical traditional insurance. Hence the need, and I would like to reinforce this once again, hence the need that we should see parametric insurance as a complement to the traditional insurance and not a replacement. They need to work together. And where one type of insurance cannot provide the necessary risk transfer, the other type of insurance might get in. In terms of prevention, in fact, this is a very interesting point, because parametric insurance can help in terms of prevention, since it uses a lot of technology. For example, the parametric insurance for floods uses sensors on the water levels. Just to give an idea, for example, the Lisbon town hall just deployed a couple of sensors in Algés and other critical areas of Lisbon, and those sensors could be used for parametric insurance. That is, if there is a warning, the water level reaches a certain point, then the parametric insurance can be the first type of insurance to reply. Afterwards, and according to certain criteria, then traditional insurance can fall in. But due to the high use of technology, parametric can be a risk prevention measure. They can help the risk managers and also the individuals to tackle the need to prevent many of the risks. For example, in terms of wildfires, the satellites can try to help and check, for example, the density of the forest and if it is clean or not. So, and as we saw, Landsat scans their surface every 3 hours. So the technology might help us a little bit in trying to mitigating the risk. Who mitigates the risk thereafter? That's another issue. But the technology is there. It generates huge amounts of data. So we are talking about the lake for data scientists, for example. but the raw material is there, the technology is there, and it can be very useful in terms of risk protection.
I was just wondering, because I remember also commenting with Rodrigo how complex it was to create such a product that would be attractive for investors and at the same time would be sustainable for insurers. So is it like my impression would be that it will be less difficult, so to say, to offer it for very extreme risks, like for extreme cases that they would be like easier to model, but like to go below that threshold and therefore to broaden the coverage, that would be more difficult to make it attractive, but at the same time to make the calculations foresee the reality. What kind of, is it very niche or do you see it broadening?
I'll pick up on a slide that Marie Scholler showed us, which shows precisely the graph has severity and frequency. So parametric insurance is mainly designed for events that have a low frequency and a high severity. So such as earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, huge droughts, huge floods. They are not designed, they're not structured because they do have its complexity. For example, just to modelize a wildfire, you need to use stochastic machine learning models. So we're not talking, we're talking about mathematical complex calculations. So they are not designed yet to provide cover for high frequency and low to medium severity, which is what is happening a lot in, for example, with what's called the secondary perils, like the flash floods that we are seeing sometimes very located in Lisbon or in Oporto. So parametric is mainly for big events, especially correlated with weather events or catastrophic events. That's why, once again, they are seen as an alternative risk transfer mechanism, and they can work together with PPP solutions to provide, for example, pools covering CatNat events and wildfire. They are not designed yet for the individual person that can buy it together with its motor policy.
Okay, thank you we are ending our time. I would just like to pose a question to Dario. If you like, because the reinsurance business is very transversal, would you like to comment on any of these topics that we approached from the reinsurer's perspective? Was there any aspect that kind of stood out to you?
Sure. Well, first of all, we work with clients to develop specific solutions as well. So for a specific client in Mexico, for instance, we developed together with them parametric insurance for earthquake. And as Nuno mentioned quite well, this type of insurance is designed to protect high frequency, low frequency, high severity events. We are talking about peak perils. And therefore, there's already a reinsurance structure designed for frequency. That's a quota share, that's proportional reinsurance. The main issue that we have to come back again is that not all risks are insurable. So, of course, we are talking about risks that are poorly maintained or that are old, that do not comply with the current building codes and so forth. But the fact is these risks exist. There is an inherent risk about them. And we have to move along the society to so that more risk can become insurable. That's why in my presentation I mentioned that there would be an idea for Portugal to discuss the possibility to implement or at least set up best practices whenever building new risks in areas that are prone to wildfires, to use materials that are fire deterrent, or to provide measures to avoid the spread of fire itself. That would be things that would improve the quality of the risk pool and therefore allow more risks to be protected by the insurance and reinsurance alike.
Thank you, Dario. We are past our time, but Rodrigo asked me to say make some final remark.
It's just a comment on something that has been noted and that I would just like to reinforce. The insurance industry relies heavily on statistical models. Parametric, like Nuno said, are one type of model, but all models from the insurance sector are stochastic, which means that they are backwards looking. They are learning from experience and trying to project into the future. And the climate change risk that we are seeing, that Marie mentioned, is the fact that return periods are becoming smaller in our lifetimes without the models being able to adjust accordingly. And the expected severities are also increasing in terms of catastrophic risks. The best example that I can think of is when the pandemic struck, there was an unexpected event without data to build upon. And insurance industry always requires a number of years of time and experience to build these models and to respond to new types of events. So the challenge for us insurers is still and very much this. We can try to predict, but it's only based on the past.
Yes, and of course, it's these final words, we can also broaden them because they are very much in the air du temps, in the spirit of the time. This notion that the past models in so many realms do not explain or can only bring us so far in predicting the near future. So we are 5 minutes past our time. I would like to thank you very much for taking the whole morning, for being here. For us, it's really important to also to understand this area and to see what can be done and really to organize our ideas. And so all your contributions were really precious, valuable. And I'd like to thank you very much. Also, maybe Miguel would like to say some final words, but on behalf of me as an insurance scholar and on behalf of the project, it has been really very, very enriching.
Okay, just to finalize, so I really believe that it was a very fruitful webinar. At least everybody is saying that on the chat, and I'm very happy with that. Of course, this comes from the quality of our speakers, to whom I thank you very much. And of course, I also have to thank to all my colleagues from the organization. So Inês and Caroline, you already heard them, and Dulce, spoke before, but also Luis Mario, that was on the backstage, and of course the responsible for the translation, Felipe and Alexandra, that did a very good job, and thank you for that. And so I think that's all. More information on our results and on this insurance sector, but not only this insurance field, will be in our website and the social networks from the project House Refuge. So, and I just wish you all a very good lunch for those that are in Europe, and so a good time for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Good time.
Bye-bye.